Okay, now. Here we go. Micro students, you know what it is. It is Jacob Clifford. I'm here to help you get ready for your test in 3, 2, 1, and hey, there we are. Hey, econ students, this is Jacob Clifford. I'm super excited to help you guys ready. We're doing AP microeconomics right now. Let's get going. If you didn't already see it, I did a live stream 2 weeks ago to do the first part of microeconomics. I'm back again. Do me a favor, in the chat, let me know audio is good, visuals good, we're looking good. Let me know how we're doing over there, and that tells me we're ready to go. So go ahead and leave me a message. Make sure we're set to rock, and then let's do this. Also, by the way, most important thing you need right now is this bad boy right here. This is the worksheet that's going to go along with this review session. If you're on your phone, it's not the end of the world if you don't have it. You definitely want to, though, have a paper and a pencil so you can draw some of the graphs, particularly in the second half when we get to. It's just 2 pages long, so don't freak out. This thing, it tells you instructions on how to get it. It's below in the description, gives you the link. You just go to my ultimate review packet. Remember, and it's free. It's free. So just go to the ultimate review packet, get to the free version, and it's underneath. It's like the exam and review stuff. So everyone's telling me we're all good in the comments. So it means we're all good audio-wise. So anyways, get this thing, print this thing out. As you're getting that ready and printing it out, or teachers, if you're in a room getting this thing ready, let me make a couple announcements. First, teachers, some of you guys are in the room with your teacher. Give your teacher a round of applause, huh? For helping you out, for being there, to supporting you, to helping you understand economics. You're almost done. The AP test is it's a 1 week, man. You're so close to it. Remember, there is a macro review tomorrow night at 4 o'clock. So that's macro tomorrow. Today's micro. Anyways, teachers, the course is changing. There's mentioned this as you guys are getting your worksheets all ready and prepared. The course is completely changing next year, not now, but next year. There's going to be a brand new AP Econ course. I made a bunch of videos explaining all the changes that are taking place and why it's changing and what's in, what's out, and the order that's changed. I made those videos. They'll be available May 20th. So the Monday after the AP test, those things will be available. I also have teacher resources and brand new worksheets you've never seen before, 100 different worksheets, a bunch of other cool stuff. So that's a little shameful plug I want to mention. You should have the worksheet by now. Let's do this. Here's what I gotta do. If you've never been to one of my live reviews, you know I've got a couple different camera angles. First thing I can do is this. This is called BAM. No, not yet. This is called BAM, graph mode. So this is what graph mode looks like. I got my camera set up. This is what we'll be kind of working on a little bit today. This is the live stream review session number 2. Make sure to get this worksheet. Before, though, we jump into this worksheet, let me go to a different mode and let's show you some things about the actual test. So super fast, real quick here. I'm gonna open up this PowerPoint. Take a look. Here we go. Let me make sure I'm up and running first. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I want to give you some information about the actual AP test. Now, take a chill pill before we start graphing. I promise you this is going to be worth your time. First thing I want you to know, there's my predictions. Oh, I don't want to show you those yet. No. You're going to get my predictions at the very end. My predictions are what I think the actual AP test is going to be on this year. So you got to wait for those. Here's the first thing you got to know. Remember, the AP test is broken up into 2 chunks. There is the multiple choice section and the free response. Now, I analyzed the multiple choice section, and here's what I came up with. And the AP test, gives you this information too, kind of idea of what percent comes from each thing. But basically, Unit 1, Basic Economic Concepts, the way I teach it, Unit 1, is about 9%. So if you understand those concepts, that's awesome. But remember, other units are more important. So as you're reviewing, don't spend all your time on Unit 1. Supply and demand and consumer choice is another 25%. You've got costs and perfect competition is another 22%. Then basically imperfect competition, monopolies, oligopolies, game theory, monopolies competition is another 21%. And there's 2 shorter units right at the very end of your course. Some of those students I know haven't even gotten there yet, and teachers are kind of scrambling to get it done. Don't freak out. That last unit is only worth 10%. First of all, the 5th unit, factor markets or resource market, is super easy. It talks about hiring workers and stuff, but it's a relatively small percentage. And the last one, which is awesome, it's just externalities, pretty much, public goods and the role of the government. Again, it's kind of like a recap of things you've already learned in previous units with supply and demand. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is as you're getting ready to get finished, you're almost done, how do you study? Well, you pinpoint what you still are not sure about. In my previous review session, the one I did, the review session number 1, I covered a lot of supply and demand stuff. So I covered most of the green supply and demand stuff. I'll do a little bit more today. And I did monopolies and a little bit of oligopolies and game theory as well as the end in my last review session. I'm going to come back in this session. We're going to talk a lot about cost and perfect competition and then the resource market and then draw all the graphs for all those different things. Here's an actual unit by unit breakdown. So if you actually go into like unit 1, basic economic concepts, I did a breakdown of what they've asked on the actual AP test. Again, I'm not going to talk about this the entire time. I'm only going to mention this for give me 8 more minutes. So 2 minutes for maybe 12 more minutes to talk about each one of these. This right here is a breakdown of the concepts and how many times they ask it on the AP test for the last, 8 years at least. So the 2018, 17, 16 test, I'm not giving you the actual question that they asked, but I'm telling you the number of times. So you can see they're going to ask 1 or maybe 2 questions on trade and comparative advantage. I covered that in the last review session as well. But you're going to see 1 or 2 questions on that concept. So make sure you know it. Now, that means also if you don't know it and you're like, I have no idea what it is, don't spend all your time trying to learn that one thing. There's other concepts that are more important. So you're going to see a scarcity question. Scarcity, unlimited wants, but limited resources. You're going to have an opportunity cost question, maybe a production possibilities curve, like calculate the opportunity cost, movement along the curve sort of question. You'll see maybe some sort of question about economic systems, free market versus a command economy, or the benefits of the free market system, or the ownership of private ownership of resources. I don't know, property rights. You might see something like that. And then those are basically unit 1 concepts you're going to see, and that's what tells you what to focus on. Notice there's very few questions that come from the factors of production. So land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, you memorize them, you got them, but the AP test asks harder questions than just definition questions. Take a look at unit 2. Again, I want to go over each one of these units so you can see. Do me a favor, by the way, don't pause this video right now because I'm going to be asking you questions later on. So kind of go through but don't bother pausing the video to look in depth. Here's unit 2. The vast majority of this most important unit is going to be coming in 3 or 4 questions from supply and demand. These are your classic, the supply and demand for oranges, and this event occurs, what happens to the price and quantity. You'll also see they're going to ask you some sort of double shift question as well. So demand, supply shifting at the same time. Remember, something is indeterminate. When demand goes up and supply goes up or something happens, some price or quantity is going to be indeterminate. You see there's going to be some sort of question about elasticity, including maybe one about cross-price elasticity and something called a total revenue test. So these 3 concepts right here, elasticity, demand, and supply, total revenue test, cross-price income elasticity. These 3 things are all part of elasticity, which I did not cover in the last session, which I'll cover today. You're going to see ceilings and floors. Be careful with ceilings and floor. Remember, floors, they go the opposite of what you expect, right? Floors go above to be binding and ceilings go below. You'll see some about consumer and producer surplus, maybe some about taxes, and definitely some sort of utility maximizing question. This is when they give you the total utility or the margin utility, and they say, okay, how much you have to calculate how much additional benefit someone gets from consuming 2 different goods, and then divide that by the price of each good, and then pick the one that gives you the most satisfaction per dollar until you run out of money. There was a free response last year on it, but remember, this is just the multiple choice questions. I'm not analyzing the free responses. I have something else that analyzes the free responses. That's on my website if you haven't seen it. It breaks down all the free responses. This is just multiple choice. Take a look at Unit 3, though. Here we go. Unit 3. In Unit 3, it's worth 22% of the actual test. You can see you're going to have some sort of question about accounting versus economic profit. Now, the reason I'm showing this to you, if you're like, why is he going so fast? Why does Mr. Clifford go so fast? I'm not trying to teach these concepts to you. I'm trying to show you what you don't know. At this point, you don't have time to go relearn everything, right? But if you see, okay, my teacher didn't cover accounting and economic profit, I don't know what that is. Well, go back and study, just go get that one concept. And obviously don't spend too much time on it because it's only 1 question on the actual test. You'll see a lot of questions coming from marginal cost. The question they always ask is the short run supply curve. It's the marginal cost above the average variable cost is the short run supply curve. You're going to see some questions, which we'll work on today, about average, variable, total costs, all those, the alphabet soup of cost curves. We'll actually do that in today's session. The shutdown rule, easy. Shutdown rule, price falls below ABC, you shut down, you don't produce anything. It's cheaper to produce nothing and take your fixed cost as a loss than to continue to produce and have a bigger loss than your fixed cost. You're going to see a question about economies of scale, know what it is. I made a video on that, and then short and long run perfect competition. Again, it's multiple choice, so they won't ask you to draw the graph, but they have given the graph in the test before, and you have to analyze it. Again, we're going to practice that today. Take a look at Unit 4. In perfect competition, you're going to get some questions about monopolies. They'll give you a monopoly. Where's the socially optimal quantity? Where is the profit maximizing quantity? Where's dead weight loss, consumer surplus? Those kind of concepts. Where's the area of profit? They did that last year on the test. Including maybe some questions about natural monopolies and regulating them. Price discrimination, the idea that demand equals the marginal revenue. By the way, if you're like, what is going on? I have no idea what's happening. Hopefully you feel comfortable with this. You've seen these concepts before. If you've never seen AP Micro before, then why are you taking the test? Like, seriously, I'm going quick because I'm assuming you kind of have seen these before. Anyway, you're going to see some questions on monopolistic competition, so know what that graph looks like. We'll draw it today. And then maybe oligopolies, cartels, and definitely a game theory matrix with two individuals doing something. You have to decide where the dominant strategy of the Nash equilibrium is. Again, this is Unit 4. Okay, Unit 5, like I said, is a shorter unit. Here it is. Most of the questions are going to come from calculating marginal revenue product and marginal resource cost and figuring out how many workers to hire. Maybe a supply and demand question, right? If the supply of labor decreases, that'll increase the wage and decrease the quantity. So yes, a few of those. You also see something on the least cost rule. I have several of these questions inside my practice test and the ultimate review packet. But the least cost rule, the idea, it's just like the utility maximizing rule we mentioned earlier, except in reverse. You're trying to figure out which resource to use. It's versus, its productivity divided by its price. Again, I can show you some questions later if you want. And last unit, Unit 6, to finish this thing off, is right here. A lot of questions are going to come from negative externalities and then just the definition of public goods. You got to understand the idea of non-exclusion and shared consumption. So, a lot of times, by the way, the AP test will ask you, remember, it's only got 60 multiple choice questions. 10 of those questions will be what I call softball questions. They lob it up and you're just like, oh man, crack. And just knock it out of the park because everybody knows that answer. But you got to get those easy ones right. And they kind of always ask about the same things. You're always going to see a public goods question that's usually a relatively easy question about public goods. You might see a question about income distribution. You'll not have to calculate the Gini coefficient. They maybe show you the Lorenz curve. But you can see this is the breakdown of each one of the units for microeconomics. Again, hopefully you're not like this. I know this stuff. Okay, cool. If you know this and you feel good about it, awesome. I just wanted to show that to you for the students who maybe don't see that not all concepts are equally distributed or as important as others. Some are more important. Make sure you know those ones. All right, that being said, we are going to graph all these things later on: supply and demand, perfect competition in the product and resource market, monopoly competition. Make sure you can do these. The AP test is kind of predictable in that way. The fair response is you're always going to have to draw either monopoly or perfect competition side-by-side graphs. So we'll practice that today. There's some key skills for fair responses as well. These are all embedded inside the concepts I just talked about. If you want to, you can come back to this slide or this part of the video and look at these later. I'm not going to go over them in detail now, but basically if you can do these things, if you can go, okay, check, I know how to do that. Check, I know how to do that. Okay, I know what ceilings and floors and taxes and quotas look like. Check. Elasticity, I know how to calculate it. I know what it is. I know what the cross price elasticity tells me. Check. If you can do that, you're good. If you're like, I got no idea how to calculate total revenue, total cost, MC, ATC, and AVC, well, circle that one, go back and make sure you got it. All right, that said, since I'm here and since we're here, the 2019 Micro FRQ predictions. Here's what I think is on the test this year. Now, normally I save this to the end of the video, but I want to give people time to make sure they download the worksheet. Make sure you got the worksheet. Here's my predictions. Let me start off by saying I don't know what's on this test. I've graded the test for years. I'm not grading it next year, but I've graded the test and I've studied this thing and I love this thing and I want to make sure my students succeed. Before I give you my predictions, I want to tell you this. Do me a favor. If you're with a teacher, everyone point to your teacher right now. Point to your teacher and tell them, first of all, I want to hear your predictions. Get on Twitter and tweet me out your predictions so I can see what you guys think. Because it's a fun game I play with a lot of teachers I know throughout the country. We all put our predictions and we all see who got closest. So that said, teachers, let me know on Twitter or email me. Let me see what your predictions are. I'd love to know. But here are mine for 2019 AP Micro Exam. Number one, here's what I think. I think the first fair response is going to be perfect competition. I think they're going to give you side-by-side graphs, and they're going to say, okay, draw a market and a firm horizontal demand curve. Make sure you label that thing. Some sort of short run, and then what happens in the long run, either drawing it, what happens in the long run, or explaining it. And I think they're going to ask you some sort of change that goes along with it, maybe a lump sum or a per unit tax. My guess this year is a lump sum tax, and you know that a lump sum tax does not shift the marginal cost. Lump sum doesn't shift the marginal cost, so it doesn't change output. It just changes the average total cost. So that's why I think it's perfect competition. Last year was Monopoly, so I mean, it's a good guess. I don't know. Free response 2, my guess is supply and demand with elasticity. I think they're going to bring in something with elasticity. They did this a couple of years ago. We have to calculate the elasticity of demand coefficient, or maybe elasticity of supply coefficient. I think they're going to throw cross-price elasticity at you as well. Keep in mind, don't get mad at me. Every year someone emails or texts me, it's a different free response. Like, come on, man. I'm taking a guess. I'm trying to help out students. I don't know. But these are my guesses. And if it's not these, it's not these. But I promise you, I made a video, whatever your free response is, I made a video talking about that concept, explaining it, because the test is predictable. Last one, I think it's going to be resource market hiring workers. I think you're going to have, here's Joe's potato farm. He's hiring work hands, and here's the different number of workers, and here's their output, how many potatoes they can pick, and then this is how many can sell potatoes for. They give you a price, and you have to calculate the marginal revenue product and the marginal resource cost, which is their wage, and then they'll do it with a chart. Like, I'm hoping they do this because this is an easy concept. My students feel comfortable with this. Marginal analysis, what's the revenue each worker generates versus the cost of each worker, and you hire a certain number of workers, and then maybe they can change it, maybe give you a minimum wage and see what happens with minimum wage. And they had a question like this last year at the bottom half of the first free response, but I think that's what they're going to do this year. That's my predictions. I could be wrong. Notice I'm not saying any externalities. Last year had an externality, so I'm not putting externality on my guess this year, but they totally could. I'm also not putting utility maximization, which they had last year, which they could. But that's my guesses. So what do you think? You're going to tell me? I can take a look in the comments right now and see what you guys think. Let me go back to regular mode here. Woo! Here I am. Let me take a look at what you guys are saying here on the comments page. Some people are saying they can't get the worksheet. The worksheet is available for free. It's on my ultimate review packet. Just look at the free version. What you got to do is, you got to just make an account if you already have one. You can get access to it, but it's right there. It's like the second to the last little section that talks about getting ready students for the AP test. So you got it. If you don't have it, not the end of the world. Get a piece of paper and let's start filling this thing out. Let's start jumping into this stuff, okay? People are talking about their teachers right now in the comments. Mr. Atkins sent me. Some people from the UK, thank you so much for coming. Some people are talking about competitive advantage. I think you mean comparative advantage. Comparative advantage, I got to mention real quick, maybe one or two multiple choice questions. It's never been asked as a free response, at least not yet. I mean, it might be someday, but it's never been asked as a free response. Just keep that in the back of your brain. If you're not good at comparative advantage, not the end of the world. Okay? If you're not good at supply and demand, yes, that's the end of the world. I mean, yeah, sorry. But okay, so that said, let's go into graph mode. In graph mode, this helps us start filling out some stuff. So here we go. This is the live stream review session number 2. We're going to talk about a few of these concepts. Keep in mind, I have behind here, as I'm working, I'll have your comments so I can kind of see them at the same time. There's a lot of people, so do me a favor, be patient as I'm watching the comments and making sure that I'm answering your questions. I'll probably answer more questions later because my goal is to answer some of your questions actually right now as we fill this stuff out. So here we go. Some people say they need help in labor market. I will jump into some of those things as we do it. All right, here we go. So first thing, let me back out so you can see the whole darn thing. In the previous review session, I covered a lot of things with supply and demand. I had you draw supply and demand over and over again. I did regular equilibrium, then I did a shift, then I did a ceiling, then a floor, then I did a negative externality and a positive externality. I did trade and show what happened to consumer and producer surplus. I also did taxes, but this is more detailed. This has a lot more details when it comes to taxes and this idea of the tax box and then the deadweight loss that occurs and the consumer and producer surplus. So what I want you to do right now, and we'll kind of do it together. Do me a favor again, don't pause the video. Watch the whole video through so I can, ask you guys questions. So I want you to try some of these questions. Here's what you got. You got supply and demand over here. I want to know the price and quantity before and after the tax, and then the per unit amount of the tax before and after. And so keep each one of these things before the tax and after the tax. Calculate each one of these things and show where it is. Now, I'll draw it on here in a second. I'm stalling right now as you guys start, and I'll look at some of your comments. But right now, you should be actually working. I heard somebody said they're from Mr. Goss's class. Mr. Goss, you rock. Awesome teacher out of Kentucky, Northern Kentucky. He's a great guy. Yeah, so here we go. People are asking funny questions on here. All right, you're not writing to me because you are right now answering these questions. I'm going to jump into each one. Keep in mind I have crapola handwriting, but that's all right. We're going to be fine. We'll figure it out. Okay. Now, of course, I messed up and turned the power off. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, so let's start this thing up. First of all, I tell my students it's important to know if you're not sure about the answers, put something. Every year there's people who leave things blank in the free response, and I cannot figure out for the life of me why. Like, just put something. If you're not sure, just try something, and we'll figure out if your answer is even close, particularly when it comes to graphing. Okay, here we go. Price and quantity. Price and quantity at equilibrium. It was $12, and the equilibrium quantity was 30. Everyone knows that. That's easy. Everyone's going to get that one right. After the tax, well, the supply curve shifted to the left, and now the new price is 13, and the new quantity is 20. Done. Easy. Everyone has that. Everyone gets it. You feel comfortable with that concept. But this is where things start getting weird. Notice how the price went from 12 to 13. Students go, oh, it's a $1 tax. Nope, it's not a $1 tax. We'll answer that later. Per unit amount of the tax. Nope, per unit tax. Well, it was none before the tax. There was no tax. So that's a grand total of no dollars of tax money. However, after the tax, how much is this tax per unit? Like I said, students want to put one a lot of times. Go, oh, it's a $1 tax. Prices went from 12 to 13. Nope, it is a $2 tax. And the way you know is the vertical distance between the supply curve. So this is 9, it went up to 11. This is 11, it went up to 13. 12, it would go up to 14. The vertical distance between the supply curves is the amount of the tax per unit. The reason why, by the way, when you first learn this in Unit 2, your teacher doesn't bother explaining exactly why. The reason why, if you think about it, is because that's really a marginal cost curve. Like supply curves, all the marginal cost curves added together. And then now a tax causes the marginal cost curve. A per unit tax causes the marginal cost curves to go up by $2. So the supply is shifting to the left by a vertical distance of $2. So that's how much the tax was. Net price sellers receives. Now, it sounds like a weird question. How much did sellers get before the tax when they sold each one of these units? Well, they got $12, right? That was the price, right? Consumers gave them $12 and they walked away with $12. Okay, cool. But after the tax, producers don't get to keep $12. Net, meaning after the tax, they get to only keep 11. What? Yeah. This new price, this right here, I'll put price for consumers, a PC, and the price that the producers receive, the net price, is actually only 11. Before, consumers spent 12, producers got 12. Now, consumers spent 13, and the producers only got 11 because 2 of it went to the government. All right, total expenditures by consumers. Before, the total expenditures is just price times quantity. So 12 times 30, what is that? That's 360. Right, so 12 times, so this box right here is 360. After, the total was 13 times 20, and what's that? That's 260. So 13 times 20, the box after the tax, the total box after is 260. Okay, that makes sense. Total tax revenue received, the tax revenue for firms. Now, the tax revenue, obviously, this is what the government gets. So the tax revenue, no, sorry. That's the last question. The total revenue, sorry, not tax revenue, total revenue received by the firms. Well, before, those firms got $360, right? Every dollar spent by individuals, right, were received by the firms because there was no tax. But now every dollar spent by consumers does not go to producers directly. Some of it goes to the government. So the total revenue received is 11 times 20. There it is. That's $220. That $220 is how much the producers get to keep. Right? Over here, total tax revenue received by the government is nothing. There was no tax. Over here is 40, the difference between these two, right? The consumer spent, let me zoom in on that. The consumers spent $220, $260. Producers got to keep $220. The difference between the two is 40. The question is, do you know where that box is on that graph? So what I'm asking you right now is, on that graph, shade in the box of tax revenue. Where is that tax revenue on that graph? Okay, go ahead and try shading that thing in. Tax revenue. There's a lot of boxes, right? If you look at this, like, well, crap, is it that? Where the heck is it? Well, the price the consumers received was that, right? $2 tax, go back down to 11. This box, and if you actually calculate that area, right, that area, 2 times 20, is $40 that is received by the government. That's how much goes to the government. Of the total amount of, let me just draw it in here, of the total amount, which is right here, spending by consumers. Ugh. So the total, this purple box is the total amount that consumers spent. The pink box is how much goes to the government. What's left over, that's what firms get to keep, 11 times 20. That $220 is how much the firms get to actually keep of that total money that was spent, okay? Now, what does the AP test ask, right? We're not just learning things just to learn them. Let's make sure we know so we can get it. AP test always ask some sort of multiple choice question on this, and they've asked a few responses as well. So they've given the same sort of graph, and they say, okay, calculate the price after, the price before the tax. Calculate consumer surplus. I haven't done that here, but you should be able to spot it and then calculate it. Okay, so let's do consumer surplus real quick. Consumer surplus, first of all, label it, okay? So right now on yours, go ahead and shade the area of consumer surplus after the tax. Where is it? Well, we know before the tax, consumer surplus was, the people paid 12. So 15 down to 12, all the way to where equilibrium was here. So that triangle right there, that was consumer surplus. And it makes sense, after tax, consumer surplus gets smaller. So this area is the consumer surplus after the tax. The AP test has asked the students actually calculate that before. That's definitely been a question that's asked. And remember, it's a triangle, 1/2 base times height. So 20 is the base, and the height is 2, and then 2 times 20 cut in half. And that's what's going to give you that area. Now, consumer surplus, producer surplus is down here. I don't want to focus on that. Let's go look at dead weight loss really quick. Dead weight loss. I went over dead weight loss so much in my last review session, where it is and when it changes and why it changes. There's a question we got to ask here. And this is, you only learn this and know this after you've studied enough to understand there's a lot of things happening here. If I said, where's the dead weight loss? I'd have to give a few more details to make sure that you're like, okay, what do you mean? What's going on in this market? If this was the marginal private cost, and this was the marginal social cost before the actual shift occurred, then the dead weight loss would exist when we were at 30. So when we were producing 30, the free market got it wrong before the tax, and we were producing the wrong amount because there's these external costs on society. That's called a negative externality, and dead weight loss would be in a different area than if this was just good old-fashioned supply and demand. This supply curve was the marginal social cost, including the marginal private cost. It was all in there. And this is the marginal social benefit. In other words, if we're taxing something that shouldn't be taxed, there's no negative externality, there's no positive externality, we're taxing something you shouldn't tax, then the dead weight loss would be in a different spot, if that makes any sense. So let's make sure we get that idea. Let's say society wants 30, and that's the quantity socially optimal. When supply curve shifts, that means we're not producing the amount that's socially optimal. For each one of these units, the benefit outweighs the cost. Society wanted more, and dead weight loss would be right here. This nice, beautiful / ugly purple triangle, that would be dead weight loss, assuming there is no negative externality. Now, the reason why that matters is because the question has to tell you. They can't just say, where's dead weight loss? They'll have to tell you, okay, where is the quantity socially optimal? What's going on in this market, right? So in this situation, the government is creating dead weight loss. Listen to this. In this situation, the government is shifting the supply curve, creating dead weight loss. In a negative externality, the government it starts off, the free market, it has the dead weight loss, and then the government's fixing the dead weight loss, and after the tax, there's no dead weight loss, okay? So make sure you watch out for that. What I did is I kind of combined concepts from Unit 2 with concepts from Unit 6, all kind of in this one graph. But there it is. This is the idea of per unit taxes, and the box area is the idea of so-called tax incidence. Okay, someone just asked for loanable funds. That's macro, dude. Macro's tomorrow. Remember, macro review session is going to be Saturday. That's tomorrow. No, it's not this stuff. We're doing micro today. Okay. So real quick, let me go back to regular mode. The next thing we're going to work on here is elasticity. I didn't spend a lot of time on elasticity last time around, but I want you to try it this time. I'm going to slow down, have you practice, but make sure you practice on your own. The thing that AP Test has been asking more and more lately is to make sure to show your work. So don't just be like, oh, here's the answer. Like, show your work for the right answers. Here it is. It's questions number 7. Right there. It says, calculate the price elasticity of demand when the price increases from 10 to $11, then show your work using the graph that we just did. So the price was here at 10, oh, right there. Price is 10, then it increased up to 11. What is the elasticity of demand coefficient, basically what it's asking. Then you should be able to figure out if it's elastic or inelastic as well. So right now, go ahead and try that question on your own. Pretend this is the actual first response in a week and that you're like, okay, this is the question I got, and answer it like you would if this was your actual first response, okay? All right, I'll be taking a look at your comments. People are asking me about Unit 6. I will cover Unit 6. I will talk about perfect competition for labor. I will do these things. Be patient. Okay. I'm going to jump into it. Yeah, some people got some ideas. They know how it works. Okay, the first thing I remember is the equation for elasticity of demand, the price elasticity of demand, and the price elasticity of supply, and the cross price elasticity. It's all the same equation, the same idea, right? It is right here. It is the percent change in quantity divided by the percent change in price. You got to be careful because it is percent change. It's not the total change, right? So you can't be like, oh, okay, quantity decreased by 10 and the price increased by 1, right? No. It's percent. What's 10 is how much of 50 and 1 is how much of 10. That's what we're talking about. If you don't feel comfortable with percent change, there is an equation, if you haven't heard it, it's the old, no, my bad. It's new minus the old divided by old times 100. That's a horrible handwriting. I'm so sorry. New minus the old divided by the old times 100 gives you the percent change. The AP test doesn't necessarily need you to write all that out. They just want to make sure you understand this. Like, do you understand that that's the equation you should be using to calculate the elasticity of demand coefficient? So you can do, they might have, maybe they're changing the rules. I don't think so, but you could just put in the percentages and go from there. So what do I mean by that? Well, take a look. The quantity fell from 50 to 40, right? So 50 to 40, percent change is, okay, well, it's a decrease of 10. 10 is what percent of 50? That's what you're asking, right? So that's a percent change. So it decreased by how much? Well, it's a decrease, not an increase. Decrease by 20%, right? And the price went from, you can see it. Price went from 10 to 11. That's an increase of 1. 1 is what percent of 10? Well, it's 10%. So a 10% increase. If you put this equation, or 0.2 or negative 0.2 divided by 0.1, that would be fine too. But this is the idea of the elasticity demand coefficient. First thing I want you to notice, listen. Always going to be negative. What? Always going to be negative because the demand is downward sloping, right? Because the law of demand, right? The price went up, the quantity goes down. Price up, quantity down, right? So the elasticity demand is always going to be negative. But for our purposes, we get rid of the negative sign and we focus on that, the absolute value of it. Basically, this pops out of 2. And what does 2 mean? Well, 2 means that the demand is elastic, or relatively elastic is the demand for at that one spot. At this spot, the demand is relatively elastic. That's what I think the fair response is going to be on this year. This year, I think that second fair response, my guess, is going to be about elasticity. They'll give you supply and demand, something maybe like this, maybe a tax, I don't know, maybe a ceiling, maybe a floor, maybe some sort of shift that goes along with it. And they'll ask you, okay, calculate the elasticity demand coefficient or the elasticity of supply coefficient, which is the same thing, except when it comes to elasticity of supply, this number is going to be positive, of course, because the supply curve is upward sloping. So price will go up and the quantity supplied will go up. Again, if the number is greater than 1, then the demand or supply is elastic. If it's less than 1, it's inelastic. If it's 1, it's unit elastic. Okay, so for example, if you did this calculation and it fell negative 20% and quantity increased by 20%, that would pop out of 1. That's unit elastic. Okay, that's the idea of elasticity. One of the things I want to point out though really quickly as well is I think they're going to ask you a question about total revenue test. The total revenue test only works with demand. It doesn't work with supply, but basically it's the size of the box. So if you go back over here and okay, the total revenue that at price 10 times 50 is 500, right? That's the size of this box. And then the price increased. What happened to the total revenue? If you can figure out what happened to total revenue, that'll tell you if the demand curve is elastic, unelastic, or inelastic. Well, it went to 11 times 40, that definitely decreased. So the total revenue box now is here after the price went up. So price went up, total revenue went down, that means this thing must be elastic, okay? So there's two ways to get whether a demand curve is elastic or unelastic or whatever it is, elastic demand. There's the total revenue test by looking at the size of the box that it's creating, and then there's also the elasticity of demand coefficient, which requires this equation. So they could ask you a question, is this demand curve between these 2 points elastic, relatively elastic, unelastic, or perfectly inelastic, all that stuff? They might ask you to use the equation. They may ask you to use the total revenue test. Remember one more time, total revenue test only applies to demand. It does not do it for supply, which makes sense, right? When it comes to supply, look at the supply curve. If the price was 12 and goes up to 13, well, price goes up, the total revenue will always go up, right? It doesn't matter how much, right? So if the price goes up, here, and if you have an upward sloping supply curve, no matter what, total revenue is going to go up. So the total revenue test doesn't work for supply. It only applies here with demand when the price goes up and it affects, does it affect quantity a lot or a little bit? Some students like to think of it as like slope, but it's not slope. Visually, if it helps you guys, if you have a really steep demand curve, right, that's the idea of inelastic demand, and a really flat demand curve. This might help to think about it, although it's not the idea of slope, elastic or relatively elastic demand curve. So, if you think of it this way, the size of the box it creates, right, an increase in price leads to a very small change in quantity because there are very few substitutes. This is a necessity. People have to buy it. And the elasticity coefficient is going to be less than 1. Over here, price goes up, quantity decreases a whole lot, and the elasticity coefficient is greater than 1, just like the one we did. And these are because there are very few, there's a whole lot of substitutes. You don't really need it. This is, there's other places you can go. So the substitution effect is, definitely at play here with elastic demand. Now, there's also a vertical demand curve. That's the idea of perfectly inelastic, and the elasticity coefficient would be 0 in that case. I made a video talking about this. I did a practice video that covered this whole darn thing, I think, really well. So take a look at that video if you haven't already done so. But I just wanted you to see that. Also, I want to show you something else since we're here. I'm going to put a supply curve on each one of these and finish this whole idea of taxes off really fast. So notice I'm going to put a supply curve with the same elasticity. If I change the elasticity of the supply curve, it could mess these numbers up. But if I put in a supply curve, here's a tax, supply curve with a tax, on each one of these, you're going to find out the box that we drew earlier right there, that pink box, the tax revenue box, looks a little different here. So this is where we started, dot, 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 down. Here's where we started, dot, dot, down. This is where we ended, dot, dot, down, dot, dot, down. Inelastic demand, I'm going to start also the original price. Oh man, horrible handwriting. And quantity, price, and quantity. If you take a look at this helps you see visually what's going on when there's a tax and what happens to that tax box and who pays more of the tax. This idea of tax incidence. So the tax box, we can see it. It's this box right here, right? We already drew it earlier. So this tax box right there, and there's your tax box right there. Now, when the demand is, it's easier to see on this one on the left, when the demand is inelastic, that means, first of all, that deadweight loss is a lot smaller. Notice the deadweight loss here is here, and the deadweight loss here is just noticeably bigger, right? So deadweight loss is smaller, which makes sense. When the price goes up, quantity decreases just a little bit. So when the government puts a tax on something they're not supposed to tax, but it has inelastic demand, there's not going to be a big giant decrease in quantity, and so there's not a big giant increase in deadweight loss. The box, though, shows you who pays more of this tax. Do you see it? The total box is who pays, how much goes to the government, but the amount that gets paid, the top portion that's above that old price, this is paid by the consumers in higher prices, right? Before, they used to pay this amount, whatever price this was, and now they're paying a whole lot more. And the bottom section, right down there, this is how much producers have to pay of that tax. Every tax, consumer and producers share a portion as long as the demand supply curve aren't perfectly inelastic or elastic. So you can see this box is a little different than one we drew earlier. And this one, they shared the tax equally, right? It was a $1, consumers paid more and producers got $1 less. And so it's a $2 tax. 2 times 40 gave you each one of the consumers and producers share the tax equally. In this case, I don't have numbers for you, but the idea is, if it's a $2 tax, maybe consumers had to pay $1.50 of that tax per unit, and the producers only had to pay, got 50 cents less of that per unit. And so the portions are different. The same thing over here, if you see the consumers pay this portion of the tax, which is a little smaller than how much the producers pay of the tax, which is the bottom part right here. Again, This might not be a huge concept on the test, but I wanted to finish it off so you can see two things. One, the idea of the total revenue test, and then two, finish off this idea of taxes. You can see who's paying more of the tax. It depends on a couple things. It depends on the elasticity of the demand, but also the elasticity of the supply curve. So if I were to change the elasticity of supply and make it more inelastic, then it would cause different things to happen. So it's all how relative and how inelastic is the demand compared to the supply, if that makes sense. So don't think, well, inelastic, demand automatically means consumers pay more. Not necessarily. If there's super inelastic demand, but there's also super inelastic supply, they could actually share the tax. So it's all relative. If the demand is more inelastic than the supply, then consumers pay more. If the supply is more inelastic than the demand, then producers pay more of that tax. Does it make sense? Is it clear? Clear as mud? It kind of makes sense, I hope. Okay, that's from Unit 2. Remember, Unit 2, I covered a whole lot. The only thing I haven't covered in either one of my videos is the idea of utility maximizing. I made a video recently, actually, that covers the idea of utility maximizing, so make sure you can do that. It's more of a skill than like a drawing graph sort of thing. It's like, do you just understand if you've got a situation where, two different goods, and they give the price of those goods, and they give you the total utility, you have to calculate the margin utility, and then figure out the margin utility per dollar for each one, and then pick the one that gives you the most satisfaction, margin utility per dollar, for each dollar spent until you run out of money. So keep getting the one that gives the most satisfaction per dollar. There's several few responses they've done that cover that concept, and pretty much that is Unit 2. Now, little hint. Teachers letting you know that concept of utility maximizing is changing next year. Remember, next year's curriculum is changing. I'm mentioning that now to entice those teachers to take a look at the videos I made that talk about that. Again, May 20th, there'll be resources about next year's test. For now, this is inside Unit 2, and it's a concept that students will see a whole lot. Let's go in and talk about right here, cost curves. Oh man, nothing gets better than cost. So I'm going to leave this up here for a little bit so you guys can work it. If you do not have this worksheet printed out, remember it's free. There's a link in the description below. If you don't have it, I'll leave this on here so you can start working on these a little bit and start filling in these blanks. If you can fill in these blanks, you understand how to do the calculations. On the left-hand side, I ask you a few more questions about ATC, AVC, AFC, how to calculate those things. So try those as well. But for now, right now, go ahead and start filling out that chart as I take a look at some of your statements here. Somebody asked me about diminishing marginal returns. I can do, listen, this is your review, dude. This is not my review. Whatever you need, I can help you guys do it. Good. I love it when either the chat slows down. That means you guys are actually working and filling stuff out, which I appreciate. Okay. Jenna says, I'm so bad at cost curves. Listen, Jenna, you got it. Seriously, you got to get good within a week with this. So take your time. They're all the same kind of equation as long as you understand that, total cost is fixed cost plus variable cost. And the average cost curves are just the total or the variable or the fixed divided by quantity for that, whatever unit you're looking at. Shout out to Mr. Player. What's up, Mr. Player from Texas? Is it really your name, Mr. Player? What a great name. Are you kidding me? Imagine that guy in college. Hey, what's your name? Mr. Player. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. In 4, 3, 2, 1. Again, I'm trying to stall a little bit, give you some time to work on this, answer these questions, practice these cost curves. This, I changed it up. I stole this from the new worksheets I made. Again, I made over 100 new worksheets based on next year's new curriculum. You definitely want to check those out, teachers. But here we go. Let's start filling this puppy out, and I'll do it right here. I won't move it around so you guys can keep working, and I'll get my hand out of the way if I can. First thing you got to know is the fixed cost. How do you calculate the fixed cost? Well, the fixed cost, there is no fixed cost column, right? So you're like, wait, I can't do it. But you can, because at nothing, when we're producing nothing, you're still having a total cost of 30, right? But your variable cost is, wait a second, you can't have variable cost of 20. Ah, crap. It's so funny. I should have spent some more time thinking about this. Something's wrong with this, the way I worded this question, but don't worry about it. No. Don't like throw it away and throw it in the trash. I needed to shift all these numbers up. So let's just, live. Unfortunately, when you're live, you can't You can't, make changes on the fly. But let's work with the way that it is. So at the very bottom, this should be 0 right here, but it's not. Don't worry about it. Don't freak out. So difference between 20 and 30 in this case is 10. So if it's 10, that means that's the fixed cost. So that answers the first question. The fixed cost of producing each unit is $10. Again, don't freak out. And there's actually been mistakes in the AP test too. There's been a couple of years where the graph had 2 right answers, and sometimes someone like me, just messes it up and tweaks something. But we'll be fine. You'll be good. Notice there's a dash here. The dash is because you can't calculate the marginal cost for 0 output. You don't know what the previous one was. But this idea of $10 is, going to help you figure out the rest of this column, right? Because in fact, I write it over here. You can't see. The total cost equals the variable cost plus the fixed cost. So if 45 is the total cost, and we know the fixed cost is 10, then this must be 35, right? This one is 10 apart from each other. This one, we don't know that one. We'll come back to it later on. This one must be 100. This one must be 200. And this one must be 150. Okay? All right. So if you got that done, which you did, okay, let's keep moving. So next, average. So do you want me to fill out as we're going down? We can do that. The average total cost. The average total cost, well, if the total cost of one is 45, and on average, each one just costs us 45, right? So the average total cost, right over here, you can't see, the average total cost equals the total cost divided by quantity. And the average fixed cost is the fixed cost divided by quantity. And the average variable cost, the variable cost divided by quantity for each one of those units. All right, so for this one, the marginal cost is just the change in total cost. So this must be 10. All right, this one says the average total cost is 20. Did I not give you enough information on this one? I might not have. I don't know if I did. I should have spent some more time. I think when I transferred this over, I might have accidentally deleted a few things, which I apologize for. If the average total, we can get this one. We can get this. If the average total cost is 20, and that equation is right here, and the AP test does ask tricky questions like this. If the average total cost is 20, the output is 3. The average total cost is 20. That means this total cost must be 60. There it is. Right? It has to be. Again, I'll say it again. If the average total cost is 20 and you're producing 3 units, then 3 units times 20 must be the total cost, which is 60. And then because we have 60, we can calculate this. This must be 50. We also know the marginal cost is the change in total cost, which must be 5. Okay? Again, if you're totally confused, I'm sorry. I apologize. But that's how you get these things. Next one, from 110 up to 50, this is 40. And over here, the average total cost is the 210 divided by 7, which is $30 right there. Let me know in the comments if this is making any sense, if you feel comfortable with this. But basically, I did all the whole numbers for you, and that's something I want to mention is the AP test. It has whole numbers. It's not going to be like tricky. You don't need a calculator. They don't even let you use a calculator. But it's all whole numbers, so you can be able to calculate it. It's just boom. It's right there. So keep that in mind as you look at these whole numbers. It's not a question of like, okay, I'm confused on the math. It's not the math. It's just remembering of how do these things all interact with each other. So the variable cost is here. Notice, watch this. See this variable cost column? I can get the marginal cost column by looking at the variable costs, right? I can see the change in here. So this went up by 15. This went up by 10. This went up by 5. This went up by 20. Or I can do the change in total cost, right? Because the difference between these two is the same. It's a fixed cost of 10. The change in variable cost and the change in total cost will get you the marginal cost. And the average total cost has to do with this column. So if you keep track of how these things are interacting, right? And the total cost divided by quantity gives me the average total cost. This process is what you need to be able to do. Now, the AP test doesn't give you like a chart you have to fill out like this. They don't do it. It's just not a thing. So don't freak out. But I do it this way so you can practice multiple different times. You try it here, try it here, try it again, try it again. They'll ask you questions. A lot of times they'll do it in words. So they'll say, okay, for the 4th unit, like the one we did that was a little trickier, they'd ask you that kind of question, assuming they're producing, and they might ask you information you don't need. So they'll say, okay, if output is 3 and the average fixed cost is 12, you don't need that information, and the average total cost is 20, how much is the total cost? Boom. And then you can figure it out with enough information in there. But basically, that's kind of questions you might see. Let's go ahead and answer some of these questions since we're here. The average variable cost of 5 units, well, 5 units total variable cost. Remember, I'll write the equation over here. If you, the variable cost divided by quantity equals the average variable cost. Oh, variable cost. The average fixed cost equals the fixed cost divided by the quantity, right? So the average total cost equals total cost divided by quantity. Average variable cost divided by quantity. It's all the same darn equation. Once you know one, you know them all. So here we go. Average variable cost of 5 units. 5 units, variable cost is 100 divided by 5. That gives you $20. And then the average fixed cost of 5 units. 5 units, it's $10. When you already know the fixed cost, you know, is 10. And so 10 divided by 5 is 2. Average total cost of 7 right there. Average total cost, we already calculated that already, which was 30. Average total cost of 3 was given, it was 20. Why was it given? That's weird. Which of these columns changes when there's a lump sum tax? All right, now here comes a new question. Number 13. Which of these columns change when there is a lump sum tax? There's two types of taxes or subsidies, per unit and lump sum. A per unit is one time, they give it to you, here's the money, subsidy. Or a tax, they'll take the money away, but only one time. Per unit is for each unit that you produce. So a per unit tax for each unit you produce, they're gonna say, okay, we give us $3 for each unit. That's per unit tax. So what you gotta remember is the difference between lump sum and per unit's effect on marginal cost. That's the key. So the question is, which of these columns change when there is a lump sum tax? A lump sum tax does not change marginal cost. It doesn't. So the variable cost does not change. The marginal cost does not change. The total cost would change. So the total cost would definitely change. If there's a tax, total cost would go up. By how much? Well, the amount per unit, no, not the amount per unit, the total amount, right? Because it would change, in this case, the fixed cost. So the fixed cost is 10, but a lump sum tax of 20 would cause that fixed cost to be even higher. So it wouldn't be 10, it would be now 30, right? It's the $10 fixed cost plus another $20 tax. That's a lump sum tax. It's also going to change the average total cost. Those things would change, but not, and the reason why I'm making a big deal about this, not the marginal cost. The AP test, in the last 10 years, they asked it more and more, and they've asked it a little bit less and less in the last few years. But the idea of a lump sum tax does not affect marginal cost. And so a lump sum tax on a monopoly or perfect competition does not affect quantity. What? Does not affect quantity. Marginal cost does not change. So where supply equals demand, where the demand equals the marginal revenue, that point doesn't change. The MRMC point doesn't change if marginal cost doesn't change. So a lump sum tax, no change in quantity. Quantity stays the same when you have a revenue curve, okay? Lump is a lump. It doesn't move. It's a lump sum tax. Quantity's not going to change. ATC would change. I mean, there's some things that do change, and the average fixed cost change, and the fixed cost change, but that's what we need to know. A per unit tax does change marginal cost, and that's what we did up here. Notice, this was a per unit tax. A per unit tax does shift the supply. It does shift the marginal cost, okay? All right, hopefully that made sense, and that helped you guys. That was the idea. Again, I want you to practice cost curves and understand that this idea of, how do you calculate these different things? And now you got it. So let's move on to the other part of Unit 3, which is what I think is going to be on the test this year, and jump into perfect competition. Before I do so, how's this going? Is this working for you guys? Again, I know it's kind of technical. I'm your online teacher. We're kind of working out questions on a worksheet. But again, you'll have a chance towards the end to ask me questions on specific concepts you want to learn and know. Keep in mind, I've made a video that cover every single darn concept. So every concept is out there. If you have my ultimate review packet, there's this really cool chart. It's like the third thing I put on there. It's a PDF. It's not a chart. It's all the videos, and it tells you like video, 1.1, and it has. In fact, I think I made it free. It's free on there. But if you're like trying to figure out, okay, what concept do I need to study? You can go look, video 3.2, where I talk about whatever concept you're looking at. I try to make them relatively quick. The summary videos are relatively fast as well, because you don't want a super long video explaining a concept like the one I guess I'm doing now. But this is different. This is review. This is trying to get you ready for that for the AP test. Anyways, somebody said it was fantastic and is going well. Okay, I'm glad. Thank you. Someone said we love you, Clifford. That's weird. All right. So before we start graphing, let's go ahead and take a look at perfect competition. I got a question for you on the back side. You've got this marginal cost in ATC. Please note a couple things. marginal cost and ATC always look the same, right? So there's, marginal cost goes down and up, ATC goes down and up, and you can see that I can have a monopoly, right, with a downward sloping demand and marginal revenue, right? I can have a horizontal perfect competition, but the marginal cost and ATC look the same. So you're really just doing the same skill over and over again. Do you understand where MR equals MC? Do you understand how to calculate the area of profit? And that's what we're working on, right here. That's what you're going to ask. Okay, question first of all starts out by saying, assume the market price is 40. Now, they have not done this, as far as I remember, they haven't done this in the free responses before. I start working, and I'll talk as you guys are working. They haven't given a perfect competitive firm like this. Maybe they have once or twice, but usually it's the same thing except for monopoly. They'll give you a monopoly graph, and you have to find some things on there, socially optimal, regulation, fair return, or where's the deadweight loss, or things like that, and box of profit. In this case, this is something you might see in a multiple choice question. So the first question it's going to ask you is where first of all you have to know is where is the marginal revenue? Like if the price is 40, but I don't know where the marginal revenue is. Well, you do. So it's the demand, which is right here. So you've got a horizontal demand curve, which is Mr. Darp. Demand equals marginal revenue right there, because it told you price is 40. That's what the price is. It's set by the market, and there it is. Now, that you need to be super comfortable. I think that is the graph that you're going to have to be able to draw on the AP test this year, except it's going to be side-by-side graphs with the market graph, setting the price, supply and demand over here, setting that market price at 40 and that firm having to take it. In this case, they're making a profit or a loss. They're definitely making profit. So let's do some calculations. You've seen this before. I know you feel comfortable with it. What is the profit maximizing price and quantity? Well, first of all, the profit maximizing price we know is 40, and the quantity, well, we're MR equals MC, which is right here. MR equals MC, that's what the firm's going to produce, which is 9 units. The AP test likes to ask why, so you don't go into a bunch of details. Just write MR equals MC. Firms produce where MR equals MC. Calculated total revenue, well, it's going to be 40 times 9, which is 360. Again, the way I got that was just the price times the quantity, so the big giant box. Now, that box is not all profit, obviously. It's revenue. They sold 9 units, and they sold them for $40 each, and that's where it is. Now, why did they sell them for $80 each? Why don't they raise the price up to, 60? Let's have them raise the price up to 60. What's going to happen? No one's going to buy. No one's going to buy a thing because the price is set because they're price takers. So remember the characteristics of perfect competition. Price takers, there's many and small firms, and there's low barriers and identical products. The reason why price is set is because every single producer produces the exact same type of product. It's a homogeneous product, identical product, and so the price is set. It's a price taker. Okay, next, calculate the total cost. Well, you got to go up to the average total cost, right, which we just did, right? Remember, the average total cost, remember, I'll write the equation again. The average total cost equals the total cost divided by the quantity. We have the average total cost, which was 30. We have the quantity, which is 9. Then you just got to multiply them together, and what you get is 270. So 270 is the box that's down here, right? There's your 270 cost box. Calculate the profit. The profit's what's left over. How much is that profit? That's $90 profit. Now, the way you got that, first of all, do me a favor. Shade it in on your graph real quick. Where's that box of profit? Maybe I'll use a pencil here. Shade that box of profit. This is the graph I think you're going to draw on your free response this year. I think they're going to ask you a pretty competitive firm with a box of profit, and you'll have to be able to draw this. They won't give you, they never have at least as far as I know, they won't give you like the actual chart like this. But there it is. There's a box of profit done. Notice real quick, we don't go down to here. There's no minimum ATC. That's not where we're going. That's an important concept for later, but that's not like where profit is. Some students like to draw it down to here for some reason, which is silly and go over. It's the price minus the ATC. That's your profit per unit. So I sold it for $40 each, right? Sold them for $40 each. Each one cost me $30, so I made $10 in each one. And since I sold 9 of them, that's a grand total of $90 profit. That's how you got the profit number. So 2 ways to get profit. You get total revenue minus total cost boxes, or just look at the profit per unit and then multiply that times how many units you actually sold. Okay, what's the price and quantity in the long run? The long run. I think that's what's going to happen this year. They're going to give you side-by-side graphs and ask you, okay, if there's profit being made, what's going to happen? Well, there's supply and demand that set a price at 40. Other firms are going to see that profit. They're going to want to enter. And as they enter in, that's going to drive the price down. If the price ends up being right here, let's say at 30, firms are going to keep entering because this firm's going to produce right here 8 units. but they'll still be making profit because that price is above the ATC. Firms will keep entering until finally the price falls down to right here. The demand equals the marginal revenue at this new long run part. That's the long run equilibrium. Yes, you know it. You feel good with that concept. So the new price would be $25 in the long run, and the new quantity we're saying is 7.5. We're assuming this is like in thousands, so 7,500 or whatever this is. But yeah, 7.5 is the new quantity right here at long run equilibrium. Now, in the next question, they ask this so often it's ridiculous. You just got to know, like just make sure you know. In the long run, will the firm earn economic profit, accounting profit, neither or both? Okay, that's a great question. Are they earning profit? So notice the AP test won't ask that. Are they earning profit? Well, that's vague because you got another difference between the two types of profit. So the answer is they're going to be earning accounting profit, and that is it. Accounting profit is profit that we don't calculate because we're not accountants, we don't care. But it's the idea that this firm is breaking even. They're making no economic profit. This is called normal profit. The total revenue equals the total cost. So this firm right here in long run, right? This is after the price fell down to 25. That box right here, which is the total revenue, is equal to the total cost. But that total cost includes opportunity cost. It includes the time and energy it takes to run a business. It includes the money they would be making doing the other thing that they stopped doing to do this job. So it's not like they're making a loss, right? I mean, every year students get kind of confused on this because they go, oh, well, why would they produce if they're not making any profit? They're making accounting profit. Their accountants like, hey, good job. You're making good money this year. They're not making money up and above what they would be doing otherwise. So they're like, if they were a lawyer and they stopped being a lawyer to start producing whatever this is, they're not making more money they would have as a lawyer. They're making just as much as a lawyer, covering all their costs, and that revenue is covering those costs, including the opportunity cost. So there it is. So accounting profit is the answer. They ask this so darn often. Just make sure you understand the difference. New question, before. When the price was up there at 40, so new question, you haven't seen this, is there accounting profit, economic profit, neither or both? Well, up there's both, right? They're making economic profit, which is that box there, and they're also making accounting profit, of course. So they're making both. How much is the accounting? I don't know. I'm not an accountant. I don't care, right? I do know, however, they're making both up there. Now, new question. Ready for this? What if the price was down, let's say at 20? And again, this graph is getting ridiculous. If the price was down here, let's call this D2 and MR2. Gosh, this is getting ugly. So if the price was down there at 20, should this firm shut down? Yes or no? What do you think? Should they shut down? Maybe. It depends. It depends on where the AVC is. So remember, the shutdown rule is when the price falls below AVC. So if the AVC is down here, yeah, they should shut down. They should actually keep producing. If the AVC for some reason was above there, they should shut down. But the idea is they'd be making a loss. Now let's make sure we get the idea of losses. Loss means that you're losing money, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're not making accounting profit. You could still have a loss and still make accounting profit. How much the accounting profit? I don't know. I don't care. I'm not an accountant. But you still could potentially do it. If the price falls down here, they're going to start making a loss. Why don't they keep the price higher though? How about if price falls to the market at 20? Why don't they keep charging, 25 or 40 or whatever? And the answer is because they're a price taker. They got to take that price no matter what, right? So they got to take this new price 20. They're going to get a loss. To loss minimize, you produce where MR equals MC, and they'll produce right here. If the AVC is up here, though, let's say that's the AVC, they should shut down and produce zilch, nada. That means they should tell everyone, just go home. Maybe we'll start producing in a week. But right now, it makes more sense for us to take our fixed costs as a loss. This right here is all Unit 3. Unit 3 concepts, that was it. Unit 3, super important unit. That's why I spent so much time on it. I talked about monopolies in Unit 4 in my last review session. Basically, between my last review session where I did monopolies and broke down that graph, and this one where I just did perfect competition, you've got the big chunks of this class. Right now, we're going to go finish off with the graphs, the big chunks with the graphs. So that's what I need you to do. Grab a pen or a pencil. Keep in mind, you need a pen on the actual AP test, but I want you to draw these graphs out. If you're looking on your phone and watching this video, first of all, thanks for watching, but do me a favor, you need to draw the graphs. If there's one mistake I think students make is they're too darn confident when it comes to like, oh yeah, I know it. I got an A first semester, I know it. And then here comes like a monopsony graph, and they're like, oh shoot. And they get caught up in the details, and they forget like how to draw it. Because, I knew you knew how to draw it back, in February or back in November, but that doesn't mean you can actually draw it now. So let's test you. Here comes a test. What I want you to do is I'm going to grade each one of these things. We'll say they're worth 2 points each for what you require. And in the comments, let me know how many points you actually got for each one of these things. So we'll go and do them one at a time and go from there. First of all, I hope, by the way, this is... you guys are enjoying the review session. It's making sense to you guys. Listen, as we get ready for this, I want you to know I'm super thankful that I am your online teacher. I'm super thankful that you guys got the Ultimate Review Packet. I'm super thankful that I get a chance to teach people all over the world this cool stuff. So let's jump into the graphs. Right now, I'm starting off with a perfectly competitive product market firm. Now, when you see that, before you start, you got to know which one. There's 3 different versions of that same thing. There's long-run equilibrium, which we just did. There's profit, and there's loss. So when you see that, the AP test will not be this vague. They'll not be like, hey, draw perfect competition, right? You got market or the firm? Are you talking about firm with profit, a firm with loss, firm with breaking even? They'll have to tell you. So on this one, I want you to please draw by yourself. Don't look at your notes. Don't look at your book. A perfectly competitive firm making a loss, but continue to produce. So if you want to draw an A, B, C, you can, but you don't need to. Go ahead and draw right now a perfectly competitive firm making a loss. Here we go. Let's see how you do. Let's do it. Rachel says, thank you, Mr. Clifford. Rachel, thank you for watching my videos. I appreciate it. Seriously, I really do. You're drawing a loss right now, so don't be texting or typing into the comments. Okay. Now, the AP test usually doesn't have you draw just one. They have you do side-by-side graphs. So you have the market for supply and demand. I'm not going to draw it. We did it in the last review session, but make sure you know, you usually draw a market next door and you draw that price over. That's kind of actually important. So, I mean, maybe I will do it, but I'll do it with a different color. So it's just supply and demand, as you know. Keep drawing if you didn't already do so. Now, you've got a market supply that's next door. So you got the market and you got an individual firm, right? As you're doing this, I want you to keep in mind, the AP test 1 year, I graded this, it's been a while ago. They actually were really kind of strict about this. Kids had to dot over, all the way over and take that price. They couldn't just go, okay, trust me, the price is taken. They had to dot all the way over and take that price. If kids just did this, 1 dot, it didn't work. They had to go beyond where supply and demand. So the students had to do that in order for it to actually count. Or they had to actually lined up on a piece of paper. It was just kind of silly, but make sure you know side-by-side graphs, perfect competition. Let's do this. First, price and quantity. You've got a horizontal demand curve because it's a price taker. We just did that earlier. Demand equals the marginal revenue. Mr. Darp. You got a marginal cost curve, which always looks the same. That's upward sloping, isn't it? Isn't that ugly? Gosh. I guess I get nervous when I'm graphing with you guys live. But yeah, that's a horizontal demand curve. Marginal cost goes down and up like this. Right? Next, you already produce where MR equals MC. Okay. That's going to be 1 point. So first point, that you got to have that. The AP test usually has actually 3 points for this kind of question. A horizontal demand curve, and then where's the output? But demand equals marginal revenue right there. No, notice, here's the best part. It's always the same. Whether you do profit or break even or loss, it's always the same. It starts the same. Just draw that for perfect competition. The ATC can either go up here, through there, or down there. There's only 3 places it can go. So ATC is going to go down here, right? All the way down here. No, that's not where it's going to go. It's going to go up, down here, hits a minimum. Make sure you drew that correctly. Draw a minimum and then go back up. ATC is right there. But we're not done. We got to make sure to label it the right way. Students sometimes want to go over here for some silly reason. I don't know why. You got to go up to the ATC, which makes sense. At this quantity, that is the average total cost. It's the vertical distance. Don't go off to the side. And over is here. Let's make this thing pretty. There is your loss box right there. Now, you can't use colors in the AP test. Just keep that in mind. But there is a loss. Now, question, is that the long run or the short run? Well, it is the short run, right? If there's a loss in the short run, firms are going to eventually leave. When firms leave, that causes the price to go up. Price will eventually go up. into up to here into long run. But right now we're in the short run. That's what it looks like. So I think this year they're going to ask you, like I said before, my prediction, side-by-side graphs, show me the market, show me a firm making a loss or firm making a profit, and what's going to happen in the long run, draw that all on the graph. Right now, text me or comment, let me know what you get out of 2 points. So the 2 points were, one, the demand marginal cost, telling me a quantity. And the second point was that box of loss. Did you get it in the right area? Let me know in the comments, and then we'll go from there. Cool. First person that tells me is going to get a little bit of praise from Mr. Clifford, and then I've heard some about tangent. Yeah, someone's asking about something being tangent to the ATC. That's the long run, and that's a different graph, and it's coming. So be patient with that. Mr. Clifford, you're amazing. I'm writing that one myself. I made that up. But I'm waiting for someone to tell me if you got this. So give me your numbers. So I got 1 out of 2 or 2 out of 2. And the reason why I'm waiting, by the way, if you're wondering, is because I want to make sure that if you guys all got 0 out of 2, like I'm not going to keep adding more and more difficult things on here. All points. Okay, we're good. Boom. Here we go. Monopoly. Now, last year's AP test, you had to draw Monopoly. Like I said, they usually either give you the Monopoly graph and you have to analyze it, or you have to draw it yourself. But here it is. Draw a Monopoly graph. If you're really good at this stuff, your brain should have asked, well, what kind? Are you talking about profit or loss, or maybe price discriminating Monopoly? I just want a regular Monopoly earning profit. So give me a profit box, give me price and quantity, and go from there. Okay? Help me out. All right? Drawing a Monopoly. Now, by the way, I know I'm kind of slowing down a little bit. I promise you I'm going to give you some tips and tricks as you jump into this stuff as we go. I appreciate you guys for all this information. Melanie's like, I'm done with them all. I got them all right. Okay, cool, Melanie. That's good. I'm glad. Well, I will go a little bit quicker. Here we go. Price, quantity. Notice the order that I draw these things in. Students sometimes just don't realize it. If they do the correct order, it's a lot easier. You got a downward sloping demand curve. You should be able to explain why. The idea that to sell another unit, they got to lower the price. They're not price takers like before. You got a downward sloping marginal revenue curve. Looks like this. Eventually it goes underneath the y-axis. You got a marginal cost, goes down and up just like before. Now, before you do anything, don't start drawing an ATC yet. Do a price and quantity. Here's the quantity for Monopoly, and the price is up to the demand, and over there's your price for Monopoly. Now, it doesn't matter where your ATC goes. If you draw this first, you're going to get that point, right? So 1 point for drawing demand, marginal revenue, marginal cost with the right quantity. Don't do price over here. That's just silly. You charge people what they're willing to pay, right? ATC is going to go down, hit a minimum. It's got to go not anywhere below this point. So here's fine, down here is fine, doesn't matter. It's going to go down, hit a minimum, hit ATC, go back up. There it is. There is an average total cost. Notice, don't look down, look up. If you're graphing, look up real quick. Price down to the ATC. Right here. Don't go down to where MR equals MC. That's just silly. Like that's not the average total cost. That's not the total cost. That's nothing. The marginal cost at the quantity output is nothing. You don't use that to calculate anything. This right here is the box, and bam, there's your box of profit. Right there. Okay. Let me know in the comments how you guys did. Let me know. Keep in mind, if there's a profit being made, I'll write profit over here. Other firms are going to, finish my sentence, other firms are going to, one more time, other firms are going to nothing. Remember, it's a monopoly. Other firms are not going to enter. If you said enter, no, they're not going to enter. Firms are going to, there's only one firm, right? There's no other firms jumping in. That's what makes it a monopoly. That's what has it stay where it is. So this monopoly, other firms are not going to enter. The price is not going to fall. None of that change is going to happen. They're making profit, and they're going to stay that way because that's what monopolies do. You can also spot deadweight loss, right? If you wanted to, this deadweight loss area right here, which I will shade in with pencil because I can. We'll come back to this if you want to. This is not a natural monopoly, but you should understand the idea of regulating. That's something called socially optimal. I'll put it in there just because I can. This is socially optimal, and something else called fair return, right? Socially optimal is the amount society wants, so you can put a price ceiling that would keep monopoly from charging the higher price over here, and that would force them to produce the amount that would end up with no deadweight loss. Again, that's a concept I'm not going to spend some nice time on. Remember, this is a non-price discriminating monopoly. This is a regular monopoly, not price discrimination. If it was price discrimination, this marginal revenue curve would become the demand curve, right? And then this whole area of consumer surplus would all become profit, okay? So do me a favor, make sure you tell me how many points you got on that one. 2 points. 1 point for having the demand, the marginal revenue, the marginal cost with the quantity. Another point for having that ATC showing that box of profit. Let me know if that made any sense, okay? Cool. So Regan said you got 2 out of 2. Bam! That means you're ready to rock. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for monopolistic competition. Can you show what it looks like in the long run? The vast majority of the time. In last year's AP test, 2 multiple choice questions. If you just understand what the graph looks like, you got it. So what does a monopolistic competitive firm look like in the long run? You got price, you got quantity. Draw it with me. In fact, draw it before me. Here we go. Let's go. Downward sloping demand. That looks very similar to here. Yeah, it's like a monopoly, right? It's a price maker. Downward sloping marginal revenue that goes down twice as fast. Yeah, okay, got it. Same thing. A marginal cost. Oh, wow, geez, holy crap, looks exactly the same. You produce where M equals MC. Ha! It's the same! Yay! Quantity monopolistic competition. Price up to the demand over here and over here. It's exactly the same. Monopolistic competition. It's the same graph. So if the AP test asks you, okay, draw monopolistic competition, and you don't remember, your brain just fried, just draw a monopoly. Done. It's exactly the same base. It starts the same. The difference is the ATC. Now, there actually has been times students mess up on this, so be careful on this one. The ATC is going to hit the sweet spot, which is right here. Right? In the long run, there's no profit being made. No profit. Right? No profit, which is the same as normal profit, which we did earlier. Right? There's no profit, normal profit. Ugh. No profit being made in the long run because in monopoly competition, there's low barriers. The difference between this is monopolist competition in the short run, right? Or a monopoly. Then firms entered if it's monopolist competition, and it would cause this to occur where there's no profit. So where's the ATC got to go? Well, keep in mind, ATC cannot start below the demand curve. If you start it below the demand curve, you've already messed up because that you're showing some area with profit or that can make profit. So don't do that. It's got to start up here. It's going to go down. Tangent. Aha, now we're going to work in we said earlier. It's going to go down until it hits a minimum point right here. And it's going to go back up. ATC is right there. And that tells you they are in the long run. Now, do me a favor. Go ahead and shade the box of profit, okay? Shade that box of profit. No, there is no profit. It's in the long run, right? There's no box of profit to shade in. So don't be shaded in stuff when there's no stuff to shade in. There is deadweight loss, which is the same area as the last one. Notice you don't need ATC to figure out the deadweight loss. The society is basically saying we want more output here. Society is saying we want more output here. But there it is. That's the actual graph for monopoly competition in the long run. Notice that the the price is greater than the marginal cost, and that's one of the reasons why they're inefficient. The price is up here, and the marginal cost of this particular unit is down here, and that's what's causing that deadweight loss. We're not producing the amount that society actually wants. Society wants to produce more. This is the idea of inefficiency. So monopoly competition is definitely inefficient, even though in the long run they're making no economic profit. The AP test has asked one of these 3 questions almost every single year. Perfect competition, side-by-side graphs, monopoly or monopoly competition. When I say that, I'm talking about the first free response, like the main first long free response. It's one of these 3 things. You know, they've asked them in other free responses too. They'll put a monopoly on free response 1 or 2 or 3. They'll do perfect competition, another one. But for the main free response, they usually ask one of these, or they'll ask you what we did earlier, some sort of thing maybe like this with some supply and demand question. But that's what you're going to see this year, man. The question is, are you ready? Do you have it? You got it? All right. Let's take a look over here. Somebody earlier today was asking in the review session about the resource market. The resource market, man, it's super important, but it's so short. It's such a short unit. I purposely did this. Notice, before, this is perfect competition in the product market. We're selling output. So we're selling shoes. This now is hiring workers to work at the shoe store. So what do we have? Instead of price, what do we have? We've got wage. Down here, we've got the quantity of labor, right? We do have a horizontal curve, but this horizontal curve is not demand because that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at a wage taker. So these are workers who are willing to work for, any different company that's selling shoes. And so the wage is equal to the supply, which is equal to the marginal resource cost. This is the cost of hiring each worker. Before, this is the benefit, the demand for selling each shoe. Shoes aren't perfect competition, but whatever, you get the idea. Perfect competition, product market, over here, hiring workers, the resource market, an individual firm. Now, by the way, there is no profit or loss to draw. There's no ATC to actually draw here, so don't freak out about that. There's a marginal resource cost, which is a horizontal supply, not a horizontal demand, right? And then you have a marginal revenue product. Notice, though, if you can see these next to each other, it might help. Look at that marginal cost above it, and notice what I'm doing. Marginal revenue product's going to go up, and it's going to go down. This is the marginal revenue product, which is equal to the demand, right? It's a inverse of the marginal cost curve. The reason why marginal cost curve goes down and up, it goes down because of specialization and goes up because of diminishing marginal returns. As you hire more workers, the output of each worker is less and less. So the cost of those units are going to be more and more. If I hire somebody and they don't produce very much more stuff because of diminishing marginal returns, then the cost of those units are going to be higher and higher. The benefit, and the reverse is true when you're looking at the value of those workers. Each worker is more valuable than the previous worker, then each worker brings in less additional revenue than the previous worker, and so the marginal revenue product actually falls. Again, this is marginal revenue product. You hire where MRP equals MRC, there's the quantity of labor for an individual firm. The market set that equilibrium price, right? But there's an individual firm. Notice there's no ATC. We're not drawing any profit box. There's none of that. That's the graph. If you were to take your paper and literally flip it on itself, that would give the same graph. So this is literally the same. You can actually see it a little bit right there, right? So I've actually told a few students who are like super confused, who they really struggle. I'll be like, listen, take perfect competition, just draw this graph, and then it's not demand, it's switch demand and supply, and then flip your paper and redraw it over again, right? So the marginal cost goes down and up, horizontal demand curve, that's the product market. This right here is the resource market. Anyways, and remember, one more time, conceptually, this is a price taker, this is a wage taker. That's the idea. There's also something called a monopsony. I'm not gonna draw it here, but if I did, a monopsony is literally a flip version of a monopoly graph. So if you're like, what's a monopoly look like, or a monopsony look like? You draw a monopoly and then flip that paper so it has a upward sloping supply curve and an upward sloping supply curve and an upward sloping marginal resource cost curve, kind of like demand and marginal cost. So except this one's going to be supply and marginal resource cost, and you have the same sort of marginal revenue product that goes down. I'm going to skip over that. If you want me to, I can come back later on. Again, that's a monopsony. It's only been on the free response one time. That was a Form B anyways. But they have it on the multiple choice. I've seen a multiple choice with the monopsony before. Let's finish off with externalities super fast. This is the second time I've come to it. I did it in the last review session because it's that important. Before I do so, I hope you guys are enjoying this live review session. Again, thank you so much for watching my videos in general. And thank you for your awesome teachers for sharing my videos. It's great. It seriously is. Let's draw these last graphs, and then I'm going to open up the floor to ask questions. Let's make sure we ask questions that stay on point. I reserve the right when it comes to questions to say that's just not important. So if you go, oh, what about the kink demand curve? I can say, well, it's not going to be on the test. Not very likely, at least. Let's go ahead and draw these last graphs. So here we go. Let's do it. Negative and positive externality. Pound these things out really quick. You got price and quantity. These are just supply and demand graphs. Somebody earlier was like, oh, go over these. I'm confused. Demand, downward sloping, upward sloping supply, demand and supply. I'm drawing them both at the same time to show you a concept. In this concept, notice this quantity is the quantity free market. This is the amount the free market is producing. With a negative externality and a positive externality, that quantity is in the wrong spot. Society does not want this amount because in this case, there's these external costs, and in this case, there's these external benefits. So this is basically saying supply and demand is important, but sometimes it gets it wrong. So, but that's not going to help you. I mean, conceptually, that makes sense, but graphically, you got to make sure to know what to label everything. This right here is the marginal social benefit, okay? This is the marginal private cost, and there's a second cost curve, the marginal social cost. These are external costs that are on some other person or society that the firms are not factoring in that give this new quantity, the quantity socially optimal. That's what society actually wants, but we're producing this amount. Society wants us to produce less. Over here, this is the marginal private benefit. This is the marginal social cost, right? And there's these additional benefits. This is the marginal social benefit that the individuals are not factoring in. You're not factoring in all these additional benefits you get from getting a flu shot when other people don't get sick, right? What you have here are not shifts. I'll say it again. They're not shifts. These are not shifts, right? There's no arrow here. We're not saying, oh, there's a tax. There could be a tax to solve the problem, but for now, when you draw the graph, don't draw an arrow. Understand a concept. There's not two supply curves. There's not two demand curves. There's a benefit curve that individuals look at, and there's a second benefit if you factor in benefits to other people. Over here, there's a cost curve that firms look at. There's a second cost curve if you factor in the cost to other people. Let's zoom in on negative externalities. Okay, here we go. Notice I'm leaving out the price because the price isn't as important for our analysis because we're analyzing really dead weight loss. So first thing you got to know is, where is deadweight loss? Come on now, draw it with me. Deadweight loss, society does not want this amount produced. That means deadweight loss is here. All right? That deadweight loss means the cost of each unit is greater than the benefit. Cost greater than the benefit. We should never produce this amount. We should produce that amount, right? I want to show you something real quick so we can go full circle. Remember the graph we drew earlier with the taxes? Let me zoom back out. Remember the graph we drew earlier, right? This shows you this idea. We in the graph, this is what freaks students out, quite frankly. These are students who are like, I'm so lost. This is the same as that, but this one is a different triangle. Like, well, they're different concepts. This was a tax on something that we shouldn't have taxed. This is a tax, or no, sorry, let me start over. This does not have a negative externality. The government is taxing something that it's not supposed to tax, causing deadweight loss. In this situation, we have deadweight loss because we're producing something we shouldn't be producing. And if we were tax it, if the government did tax it, that deadweight loss would disappear because we produce the amount society actually wants. So be careful of just memorizing triangles. Oh, a triangle, shading a triangle. There's other concepts happening. It'll make more sense with the second example with positive externalities. So let's take a look at that. Over here, right, society is producing quantity free market, but society wants quantity sociooptimal. That means the deadweight loss must be right here. These are all units where the benefit was greater than the cost. Benefit greater than the cost. Please make more, please make more. But they're not making more. They're holding back production, or people are holding back what they're buying because they're not factoring these external benefits to other people. I in the last video, I went over deadweight loss pretty extensively, but notice, I mean, if you just take a look back, it's on all four of the graphs you just drew, which shows you why it's such an important concept on the AP test. You've got deadweight loss for a monopoly, you got deadweight loss for monopoly competition, you've got deadweight loss for positive externality and negative externality. It just basically shows you how market can be inefficient and how, in this case, a subsidy could cause the demand to shift over. By the way, what kind of subsidy? Per unit or lump sum? Do you remember? Yeah, a per unit subsidy. A per unit subsidy would cause the demand curve to shift over to the right because the per unit subsidy changes output. A lump sum does not actually change output. Okay? That's it. That's the idea of deadweight loss. These are the key graphs that you're going to see on your AP test. Let me zoom them out again. Side-by-side graphs, perfect competition, profit, loss, break even. Monopoly, they could ask you for a natural monopoly or give you the graph for a monopoly. Monopoly competition, in the long run, usually they have you draw it. They could have you draw it, like not in the long run and then put it in the long run. You've got perfect competitive resource market, a monopsony, which I left off, then negative externality and positive externality. You're also going to see the production possibilities curve, but not going to be asked to draw it. You also might see different variations of supply and demand with a ceiling, a floor, taxes, or tariffs. Those are all big concepts you'll see on the free responses, if that makes any sense. Okay, here's what I want to do really quickly. Before I give you open mic to start answering some questions, let's go really quick back to the PowerPoint that I showed you earlier. Come on now, let's go. And let's go back to this super fast, since we're talking about free responses. This right here, the 14 key skills. Make sure, actually, I'm not screwing this up. Yeah. Okay, so the 14 key skills for free responses. Take a look at this list. And as you're going through, I want you to say check. So check, I got this. Can you calculate consumer surplus? We didn't do it on our practice here, but can you calculate that area of consumer surplus or deadweight loss when they give you the numbers off a graph? Can you explain the results of a ceiling and a floor? Ceilings always cause the quantity to decrease if they're binding, and floors cause, in both cases, they cause quantity to go down. And in the last video, I went over it. So in the last video, I went over 1 and 2, identify consumer surplus, producer plus deadweight loss. And then in the last video, I also did ceilings and floors. Today, we did elasticity, calculating elasticity of demand at least. We didn't do supply. I didn't do cross price, but you understand the idea that it's the percent change in quantity divided by the percent change in price. In number 4, calculate and maximize margin utility. That's the only thing I did not do in any of my review sessions. I didn't go through that process. It was on last year's free response. It's something that's important. I have videos that explain it. Number 5, apply the profit maximizing rule for production. I did it twice. In the first review session, I did it using a chart. So I said, okay, here is the total cost, here's the price, how many output should you produce using a chart. In this video, we did it with the graph showing you the horizontal demand curve, marginal cost, and using it that way. Number 6, calculate total revenue, total cost, marginal cost, ATC. We did it today. Number 7, identify shutdown point in the short run supply curve. Short run supply curve is the marginal cost above the average variable cost, and shutdown, price falls below the AVC, you shut down, you produce nothing. All right, 8, compare per unit and lump sum taxes. We did that today. Per unit, shift the marginal cost. It changes quantity. Lump sum does not change the marginal cost, does not change the quantity. 9, identify the elastic and inelastic range of the demand curve. Guess what? Oh, we did it in the last video. Yeah, we talked about that. The elastic range is when the marginal revenue is positive. The inelastic range is when the marginal revenue is negative. Identify the socially optimal quantity. We did that using a monopoly in the last video. Not dominant strategy and national equilibrium. I did a little bit in the last video. Applying the profit maximizing rule for workers. I did that in this last video and this video. We did it not for workers. We did it for the one graph. So we did show that concept. Conceptually, it's right here with that graph we did earlier. So there's the graph for hiring workers. But in the last video, we actually did the calculations. Calculating the MRP, the MRC, which happens to be also number 13. And the last one is externalities and showing the solution for externalities. Be able to draw them, be able to identify what the government, how the government can solve them, and what happens to deadweight loss before and after. Again, for externality, they start off with deadweight loss, and the government solution gets rid of that deadweight loss. Okay, if that makes sense, I hopefully you understand that we, through these reviews, covered so much stuff, man. Are you kidding me? We just covered so much stuff over these last 2 review sessions. I mean, it's been a while. It was like, what, 2 hours each, so 4 hours of review with Mr. Clifford, which is awesome. Good for you. Cheers. Okay, so what do we got to do now? What I would like you to do is let's start answering some of your questions. Keep in mind, this right now is when my chat's going to boom, and you're going to have like 1,000 people asking me stuff. I can only cover one thing at a time. As you're asking me questions, I will do my best to answer them. Keep in mind, like I said, I might refer you to another video. I might refer you to something else. Someone just asked about allocative efficient and productive efficient. That's actually something I should have mentioned, so I will go back and show you allocative and productive efficiency. So hold up on the chat. I can't see it right now. Take a look. Let's go back to monopolistic competition. All right, there it is. Beautiful graph. Isn't that pretty? Okay, there is a difference between productive efficiency and allocatively efficient or socially optimal. This right here is socially optimal. This is where the marginal cost, let me get rid of this junk, okay? Right here is socially optimal equals where the price equals the demand, right? In this case, not price, I'm sorry, I messed that up. Socially optimal is when the marginal cost equals the demand. Okay, so right here, this is what society actually wants. If we produce this, there'd be no deadweight loss. Makes sense, okay? That's socio-optimal. Productively efficient is producing at minimum ATC, which in this case, in this graph is super close. But this is the idea of minimum ATC. And we're producing the lowest possible cost. That's productive efficiency. Okay? Now I want you to know, when are we productively efficient? We'll take a look at other graphs. Are we productively efficient in that graph? Take a look. Right, there's a loss being made. Are we productively efficient? No, we're not producing at minimum ATC. So not productively efficient, but we are allocatively efficient. Price equals the marginal cost. So in perfect competition, there's no deadweight loss. In perfect competition, there's going to be no deadweight loss. The amount society wants will be produced in perfect competition. We might not have productive efficiency in the short run, but in the long run we would, because in the long run, eventually the demand in this case would go up, and the ATC, it would go up to ATC at its minimum. In the long run, there'd be both productive and allocative efficiency. But in monopolies, not socially optimal, so not allocatively efficient because there's deadweight loss, and not productively efficient. In this situation, not neither one in productively or allocatively efficient. Again, it's more of a concept about efficiency. The reason why I'm bringing it up for monopoly competition, by the way, is because they like to ask questions about economies of scale, and they'll ask you, is monopolist competitive firm experiencing economies of scale? The answer is no, because they could be producing more and their average total cost could be still falling. So yeah, the monopolist competition and monopolies do not have economies of scale, right? That's that concept right there. Let's go back to your questions. And we'll see. Some people are asking about game theory, please. We'll see if I can get to it. Somebody asked about least cost rule. Both the least cost rule and utility maximizing, I'm leaving out. And not to be a jerk, but one, I made videos, and two, The main reason why is because they're the kind of same skill, and it's harder for me to come up with a question on the fly for one of those things. So I'm not going to do those if that's okay. But I'll tell you what it is. The least cost rule is the idea of you have two goods, labor and capital, and it gives you the marginal product for each. So you'll have, how much additional output are you getting from the first worker? So 10. Next worker's 7. Next worker's going to be 5. Next worker's 2. Next worker's 1. And then the same thing over for the capital, the machines. And then they tell you the price. Well, okay, workers are $2 and the machines are $20. And since they're different prices, you have to put them in like terms. You have to divide their productivity, their marginal product, divided by their price to put them in like terms. And then you pick the one that gives you the most output per dollar spent. It looks a whole like utility maximizing, but that's the least cost rule. You keep doing that until you run out of money, okay? Unregulated monopoly, someone just asked, that's the graph we did earlier. That's literally, we just did it. That's an unregulated monopoly right here. Regulating it, we said, would be at socially optimal or fair return. Yeah. And this is not a good example because it's not a natural monopoly. Somebody asked me about economies of scale. She keeps kind of, economies of scale. Economies of scale is more of a concept than a graph. It does have a graph that goes with it. The AP test has asked you to see that graph before, but the graph is the long run average total cost curve. So the idea is long run average total cost. Here's the quantity. As you produce more and more stuff, right, that causes the long run average total cost to fall. This is the idea of economies of scale. Then they level off. That's called constant returns to scale. And then they go back up again. That's called diseconomies of scale. This is a long run ATC. Now, it looks like, oh, that sounds like a regular ATC. Well, not really, because in the long run, all resources are variable. And so this is not the idea of the short run curve we've been drawing, the ATC we're looking at. This is something weirder and different. This is the idea is as you produce more and more output and you decide to buy a bigger and bigger factory or different size factory or different numbers of workers, you'll have a bunch of different ATC curves, right, for those different sizes. And eventually those ATC curves would create this long run average total cost. And eventually, like I said, they level off. All you got to really know for the test is the idea of where the ranges are and the idea that producing more, if you're a firm and producing more causes your average cost to fall because getting bigger is cheaper, that's the idea of economies of scale. So this one's is economies of scale. This is called constant returns to scale. So your average costs don't fall any further. And then diseconomies of scale. I made a really cool video that's super short that talks about it. I show the graph, but also explain the concept with some example using bread. So you can watch that video, you'd be like, oh, I totally get it. The AP test, they ask about it, but really it's usually not particularly hard questions they ask. Sometimes it's like definition questions. All right, somebody asked me about what the difference between oligopoly, colluding, non-colluding, and price leadership. Price leadership is probably not on the AP test very often. You should know that a colluding monopoly is a monopoly. Sorry, colluding oligopoly is like a monopoly. They're basically, 3 firms all acting as one firm, and so it would be like the monopoly graph. And then a non-colluding has the kink demand curve, which has never been on the AP test that I'm not going to explain. I have a video that does explain it, but it's not on the test. But there's this thing called the kink demand curve you can learn about in college if you want. Other questions people are asking me. Some people are asking, I think, more intermediate econ stuff. Other people are asking me macro questions. Macro is tomorrow at 4 to 6 p.m. Keep that in mind. This is all micro today. Let me go back and see some of the questions you guys had. Some people are asking more game theory. What's a natural monopoly? Let's go do natural monopoly super fast. Okay, so what's a natural monopoly? So the monopoly you drew earlier was not a natural monopoly. A natural monopoly looks slightly different. So stay with me. So here is quantity and price. You got a downward sloping demand curve. That looks familiar. Downward sloping marginal revenue curve. Oh, that's easy. But looks a little different with the marginal cost. The marginal cost is going to go down and up. And society wants this amount produced. Remember what's that called? That's called allocatively efficient. Society wants quantity socially optimal. That's what society wants. If we produce this, there'd be no deadweight loss. Obviously, a monopoly wants to produce where MR equals MC and charge a higher price, and there would be this giant thing of deadweight loss. The reason what makes it a natural monopoly is this. If I keep the ATC going down, it hits a minimum, and it goes back up. ATC looks like this. That's a natural monopoly. And the reason why is at the quantity socially optimal, the average total cost is still falling. So they're in the range that there would be economies of scale. Getting bigger would cause lower average total cost to occur. And as they get bigger, if average total cost is falling, that means only one firm should produce this at the lowest average total cost. So it makes sense to have only one electric company, because one electric company, if you had a bunch of competing electric companies, they'd be, digging up the street and they'd be competing with each other, and they'd have the same, same infrastructure, they'd have the same, all sorts of different things. It makes more sense to have only one firm do it. It'd be a natural thing to have one firm produce this because they have a lowest average total cost. That's a natural monopoly. Now, that's going to help us put things together. A monopoly that is unregulated would produce this quantity. That's price and quantity. So I'll put this right here. I'll put this unregulated. Right? So an unregulated monopoly would produce where M equals MC and try to make profit. The electrical company, because electricity is kind of important, could potentially do this, right? And so the government can come in and say, no, we're not going to let you do that. We can put in a price ceiling somewhere. And that price ceiling can go basically two places. One right here, where the ATC is demanded, one right here with a marginal cost. This one, if it was right here, if the price ceiling was right there, right, that would be, it's called fair return. That was weird. Fair return pricing. Fair return means they're making total revenue equals total cost. So they're making no economic profit. This would be fair for them to do because it would make sense to put a price ceiling where they're not making any economic profit. But they're still going to be deadweight loss, right? So if we're producing this quantity here, we're still not producing enough electricity that society actually wants. So to get them to produce even more, you can put a price ceiling here, price ceiling there, price ceiling one, and that would get rid of deadweight loss, but it does create a problem. Do you see the problem? I mean, this graph looks kind of ugly, but the price is here and the ATC is above it. They're making a loss. So a natural monopoly would need some sort of subsidy to stay afloat. So they need a lump sum subsidy just to stay afloat, the amount of the loss they'd be making. Again, conceptually, don't even listen to the graph. I mean, you just understand the idea. A natural monopoly means there are some markets where it's natural to have only one firm produce things because they can do it at the lowest average total cost. And that's a natural thing. Graphically, notice the graph we drew earlier is not a natural monopoly. Now, let's see if you can spot this. Seriously, if you can figure out why, when you look at this graph, it's not a natural monopoly, and you can spot that, you totally get it. The question is, can you? Can you see why that's not a natural monopoly? Well, at the socially optimal quantity, what's ATC doing? Well, ATC is going back up. So that's not a natural monopoly. That's not it. That's a natural monopoly. Done. So there you go. Hopefully that helped you out. I forgot your name. I'm sorry I didn't get your name when I went to help you. But hopefully that helped. Oh, yeah, Gary. Gary, make sure to say thank you in the comments, Mr. Clifford. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm looking through. Some people are talking about natural rate of unemployment for some reason. I don't know why. That's all macro stuff. Other people are randomly putting random junk. Please don't do that. Okay. What's that's still a weird concept to me. I'm not sure. Oh, types of taxes. All right. Sure. So there's 3 types of taxes. The AP test has asked those questions before. The 3 types of taxes are progressive, proportional, and regressive taxes. They're all about the percent of the amount of percent of income on different people. So it'll make more sense with an example. So the American federal income taxes are progressive income taxes. So the more the higher the income, the higher percent that you actually pay of your income. So, there's a 10% and there's 15% and it goes up in increments. Your marginal tax rate increases. And so there's a higher percent of income taken from rich income earners. Then there's proportional, which would be like a flat tax of like 10%. And that would take the same percentage from all income earners. So if you're poor or rich, you still have to pay 10% of your income. And then a regressive tax, that's when there's a higher percent of income that's paid from lower income groups. And people always go, well, that doesn't seem like that's like a realistic thing. Sales tax is exactly it. If there's 2 people buying a hamburger and they both have 8% sales tax, right? One of them's a millionaire. That's a very small portion of their percent of income, right? So we're not looking at the percent of the price of the burger. We're looking at the percent of their income. So a regressive tax is when, a poor person pays, 8 cents for a burger of taxes. That 8 cents is a large percent of their income. And that's what regressive tax is. Again, 3 types: progressive, proportional, and regressive. The AP test will ask a question. It's usually a softball question about, okay, did your teacher teach this? Have you seen this concept before? Same thing for like antitrust laws in Unit 6. They'll ask you about antitrust laws, sort of, softball question. Do you know what antitrust laws are, what their goal is? Obviously to decrease deadweight loss or to, create more competition or whatever. Somebody asked about the Lorenz curve. That's also from the same unit I'm talking about, Unit 6. Not going to be on the AP test as a graph on a fair response. Visually, it is a graph that shows you, how a country is when it comes to income inequality. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but it's inside the Ultimate Review Pack in one of those videos. It's also in the Unit 6 summary. It's an important concept. Like the idea is important for society, but graphically, if you've seen it once, you got it. So the Lorenz curve is kind of an easy concept. Somebody else asked, are the practice tests comparable to the AP exam in your opinion? That's a good question. So the practice tests in mine are very similar. I wrote them off of actual AP tests. Not the same question, but kind of similar to those questions. You want to try a full AP test though. So if you have the time, like right now, like as soon as you can, get your hands on an actual AP test, not my practice ones or not ones that some textbook or some publisher made, but the actual released AP test questions are super helpful because then you'll be like, okay, this is the wording. This is what it looks like. So yes, mine do feel like that. Some asked all about Phillips curve, macro, perfect competition graph. We did it earlier, so you have to rewind and go take a look at that. What about Nash equilibrium? That's game theory. We talked about that as well in my last one. Someone asked about market failure. Really, we just did that. That's Unit 6. Market failure is like negative externalities, positive externalities, and public goods. Again, public goods, there's two characteristics that you just absolutely got to know of public goods. They're non-exclusion and shared consumption. So, make sure you understand those concepts. I'm kind of running out of things to show you because I've done. Yes, someone asked if the Lorenz curve was the banana graph. That's exactly what the Lorenz curve is. It's the banana graph. Let's do this. Let's go take a look at a monopsony. Obviously, the reason why, I could go over the same thing over and over again, but I don't want to, the people who've seen this other review session and most of this review session want to waste your time. I don't want to do that. So let's do something you haven't seen. This is kind of the bonus round. Yep, that's right. Mr. Clifford bonus round. Let's go draw a monopsony. Not a monopoly, a monopsony. So a monopsony, all right. So with me, try drawing it, see how you do. Let's say for some reason, and I don't think they're going to do it, but let's say they do. They might do it, by the way, in future years because they've changed some things with the AP test curriculum. They might actually do a monopsony, but I don't think it'll be this year. But if they did, hey, you'd rock it. First of all, it's not price, it's wage. What does a monopsony look like? Remember, a monopsony conceptually is the idea of there's only one firm hiring. So there's only one buyer of labor. Right? So this is instead of a monopoly when there's only one firm selling, this is only one firm hiring any particular labor. Someone wrote bonus time. Yes, bonus round. Here it is. So first of all, there is no horizontal demand or supply. Remember, horizontal is for price makers and wage. I'm sorry, for price takers and wage takers. We don't have a horizontal supply here. That's not what's going to happen. We have an upward sloping supply curve. So here's your upward sloping supply curve. As the wage goes up, the quantity of workers who would supply their labor would increase, which makes sense. It's all about incentives. So wage goes up. Yeah, I'm more likely to go get a job wherever that is. Cool. Awesome. Now, a non-wage discriminating monopsony. Remember, I'll write this up here for people coming late. Monopsony. Real quick, I want to point out, this is seriously a bonus round. If you're like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this, I'm freaking out. Don't freak out. This is like the bonus round to get you like a 5, like for some of you guys, like an extra 5. But this is not like a key graph. I'm just giving it to you because I can. The supply curve is upward sloping, but the monopsony can't pay people different wages. I can't pay one person. So somebody down here that's what a supply curve means. Somebody down here is willing to work for $1. Okay, I'll work for $1. I got nothing better to do. Somebody else, you have to pay them $2 to get them to work for you. Another person $5. Another person $30. Another person $100. As you increase the wage, more people will supply their labor. Remember, supply in this case is workers supplying their labor. Now, since I can't can't pay, if I'm the monopsony, I can't pay the first worker $1 and the second worker $2 and the third worker $10. I have to increase the wage for all of them. So instead of this first worker paying him $1, this next worker, if I have to increase the wage up to $3, I got to pay him $3, and the other worker who'd be willing to work for $1, $3 too. That means my marginal resource cost is not equal to the wage of that next worker. It's actually higher. Oh yeah. The marginal resource cost is higher than the wage of that next worker, because the wage of that next worker plus the money I have to pay the previous worker that I now have to pay higher wages because I can't wage discriminate, it causes the marginal resource cost to be up there. The demand is just the marginal revenue product, right? But it's the same thing as before. And then you just follow the rules. The great thing about these graphs, if you just follow the rules, you're fine. How many workers do you hire? Well, you hire where MRP equals MRC. Normally you'd hire where supply equals demand, right? That's where perfect competition would be, but this is not perfect competition. This is only one buyer hiring labor, and they're going to hire right here. So they're going to hire less less workers than they normally would in perfect competitive labor market. And here's the key, they're not paying them here. No. They're paying them down here. This is the wage that they're paying them, which is less than the equilibrium wage that would normally exist, and which makes sense. The quantity is less, the quantity of workers is less, and the wage is less, which totally makes sense if you think about it. If there was only one firm in town, there's only one firm hiring, you're going to get a lower wage. And the reason why is this graph right here. That wage is lower. Now, there really is no deadweight loss per se to draw necessarily. I mean, the concept is there, and there's no like profit box or anything, but that's the graph. They've asked us on multiple choice questions before. They've given this, but basically the question they always ask is, how many workers would you hire? What's the quantity that the monopsony would hire? And just follow the rules. You hire where MRP equals MRC, which is here. You pay them a wage, what they're willing to work for, which is the supply curve. That's the wage, done. That's what you'd see on the test. If they ask you like how to draw the graph, keep in mind, this is a reverse monopoly. If you turn the paper over, I know it's super hard to see, but if you see, and I actually draw it in, which I can, you've got a downward curve here, you got another curve here, you got another curve right there. Right, that's a monopoly. Demand, marginal revenue, marginal cost. That's what monopoly looks like. But a monopsony is a different concept entirely than a monopoly. But visually, if you just remember that, that'll give you a fighting chance on how to remember how to draw that actual graph. Okay? Hopefully that made sense. And if it didn't, that's okay, because it's not a big portion of the test anyways. So you're totally fine. Somebody said monopsony is usually not covered. That it's exactly right. So don't freak out about it. Someone said, I think MRP is straight. No. We did it earlier. So don't get confused, guys. Let me show these things side by side. It'll make more sense. So if you're like, what's going on? I understand. Sometimes it freaks people out. So let me show you this again. This right here is what we drew earlier. Now, they're not the same size, unfortunately. That's okay. This is what we drew earlier. This is a perfectly competitive resource market firm. They're hiring workers. MRP goes up and then down, right? This is a monopsony. Right? The only difference between the two is this is a wage taker, and this one is not a wage taker, it's wage maker, right? And that's why the upward sloping supply is happening. So again, if nothing else, I need you to understand something. When we're talking about importance, like when you look, okay, what's the importance? This, super important. You got to know that graph. They ask it all the time. This, not important at all. Don't even listen to me right now, and don't worry about that. That's not going to be on the test, so don't let it freak you out. Because that's not a big concept that you're going to see very often, okay? I heard another good question. Someone just said, what's the difference between marginal product and marginal revenue product? Marginal product is just the additional output each worker produces. The marginal revenue product is the additional revenue each worker produces. So it's the marginal product times the price of the product they're selling, right? So if I hire a worker, he adds an additional, I'm making pizzas, he adds an additional 5 additional pizzas he can produce. That's his marginal product. If I can sell each pizza for $10, then his marginal revenue product would be $50. It would be his additional output he can produce times the price of that output, okay? Somebody asked me a good question about, can you elaborate on consistency points in the free responses? I can. So that's actually a really good question. I wonder if that's a teacher. Okay, so a consistency point is this. On the AP test sometimes, they'll ask you questions where, they'll ask you draw supply and demand side-by-side graphs, and then you have to draw it, and then they'll ask you, okay, now on your graph, what would happen if on your graph you mess up on the first part of the question and they want a profit, but you drew a loss, and then you said something later on, they can still give you points. It's called consistency points. So if you stick with your own logic, do you know what I'm saying? So if they ask you a question, what happens to price and quantity? So okay, price goes up, but it's supposed to go down. You miss that first point, but you can still get the second point if with that price you said up, something else occurs, then you can still potentially get that point. So I think it's actually really fair. In fact, the AP test people are actually really fair. You'd be surprised how good they are about being consistent when it comes to grading, and more importantly about not just destroying some kids for making one mistake and like, oh well, guess what, you don't pass this thing. They're really smart people. Seriously, it's a fun group of people to work with. And if you're a teacher, you never graded, you should sign up. It's pretty cool stuff. Okay, there's other people asking questions. Mr. Clifford, are you still beating students at Foursquare? Yes, I'm amazing at Foursquare. Okay, let me show you something else really quickly. Since I am here and since you're here, I want to ask you one more question. Here it is, okay? What happens on this graph? Here is quantity, here is price. This is a double shifter. What happens when demand goes up and supply goes down? I want to know what happens to price, I want to know what happens to quantity. So let's finish this off, this review session, with a double shift supply and demand question, which they ask all the time. Make sure you understand how to actually do this thing. Go ahead and draw what happens, if you know what happens on the graph, and then see what happens to price and quantity. I want to know what's going to go up, what's going to go down, or something else is going to happen, all right? So try it on your own. And 3, 2, 1. First of all, you got a downward sloping demand, upward sloping supply curve. You got an equilibrium. Price and quantity. So this is where we're starting. I'll put a dot right there so you can see we start. Now remember, demand increase, that's easy. Demand increase, shift to the right. Supply decrease, well, be careful. Don't do a supply down. It's not down. Supply decrease means we can produce less stuff. So supply would shift to the left. So demand increased, supply decreased. That puts us now at this new point right here. To answer the question, what happened to price? Well, price, no doubt about it, definitely increased. And the quantity is indeterminate. It means you can't tell. So the AP test asks double shift questions all the time. You get at least one of them. Last year they asked one. It was a little trickier last year because of the way it was worded. But the idea of indeterminate means you can't tell. It depends on how severe these demand and supply shifts are. But that's the kind of question you're going to see. This is a softball question though, guys. Seriously. The way it's set up will be, okay, here's assume the demand supply for cars occurs and these two events happen. What will most likely happen to price and quantity? Well, just in this case, price goes up and quantity is indeterminate. Remember the rule for double shifts, you don't have to memorize. If you're thinking, oh, okay, I'll memorize that. No, just draw the graph and remember something, either price or quantity will be indeterminate depending on how you actually drew it, okay? Hopefully that makes some help you guys. All right. Some people are asking other questions here. Keep it up. Let me do something real quick as well. So I don't want to take us over time, but I do want to remind you I'm going back right now to look back at if there's anything else I have not covered that's most likely or very likely going to be on the actual test. I'm going back to that PowerPoint you saw earlier. Something that maybe I did not spend very much time on was a price discriminating monopoly. We hadn't drawn that graph, and that's okay. It's not asked very often on the AP test, but it's definitely a concept that you need to know, a price discriminating monopoly. Real quick. Someone's asking that question about consistency points. There's no half points when it comes to consistency points. The consistency points will be like this. I don't want to give you too much of an example, but the idea of consistency points, to finish it off, if there's 2 points, you would get the first one, wouldn't get the first one, but if you were consistent, you could potentially get the second one. The AP test doesn't do half points, not for years at least, for a super long time. Let's finish it off with a graph, right? Because we can. Let's make sure we see it. So between all the review sessions, I've covered every single darn graph and every single darn concept. A price discriminating monopoly, also not asked in the AP test very often, but let's see if we can do it. We've got a downward sloping demand. It's a monopoly, except marginal revenue is not downward sloping and below it. It is equal to the demand. And this is because to sell another unit, they got to lower the price of the units. They don't have to lower the price of units they could sell for a higher price. So if someone's want to pay $100, they charge them $100. Somebody else will want to pay $90, they charge them $90. Someone's want to pay $80, they charge them $80. So the marginal revenue is not less than the demand. If you added a marginal cost curve and an average total cost curve, you end up with, first of all, where do you produce? MR equals MC, which is here. That's the quantity the quantity for the monopoly. That's price discriminating. I'll write this up here. Price discriminating for people who came in late. So price discrimination graph looks like this. Couple things you got to look at when you see this graph. Number one, where's the price? Is the price right here? No, because there's multiple prices, right? They're charging prices up and down this thing. They're charging one person $100, another person they're charging $20. You can't really label a price. You can label a few other things. First of all, I want you to label the dead weight loss, okay? Where's the dead weight loss in this sucker? Well, there is none. No dead weight loss. Okay, keep that in mind. They are producing the amount where the price basically of that last unit equals the marginal cost. They're making the amount society wants. There's no dead weight loss, so don't worry about it. There's no dead weight loss, right? But they are charging people higher prices. Next, where's the consumer surplus? Do you see a consumer surplus? It's right. There's no consumer surplus either. So no consumer surplus. Instead, it's all been converted to profit. So the price of that last unit times the ATC, each one of these prices down to the average total cost of producing those units, right? So that's the average total cost of producing the units, priced on ATC. This entire funky shape here, this is all profit. And if you look at this graph compared to the monopoly you drew earlier, you understand why this is not consumer surplus. This is profit. Why you'd want to price discriminate, right? Before, if you look at next to each other, you can see the graph we drew earlier. This is all getting crazy. This is what a non-price discriminating monopoly looks like, and you get a little box of profit, and there's some consumer surplus, right? So over here, this is consumer surplus that exists with a non-price discriminating monopoly, because people want to pay and they did pay. Did pay. In this case, what people were willing to pay is exactly what they paid, because the monopoly perfectly priced discriminating, causing that consumer surplus to become profit. So obviously they would want more profit. Now this is not easily done. You need several different things to be in place to pull it off. They need to make sure that consumers can't resell the product to other people. They got to find a way to segregate the market in such a way to find out who's willing to actually pay more. This doesn't happen very often, but graphically that's the concept. What you got to know is, again, no dead weight loss and no consumer surplus, because all that consumer surplus has been converted into profit. I think with that, I've covered every single graph you're ever going to want to see on that AP Micro exam. Do me a favor, if you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button. I already told you my free response predictions. If you came in late, let me remind you really quickly, and we'll finish out here. Number one, I think it's going to be side-by-side supply and demand with perfect competition in the product market graph for number one, showing you, profit or loss, and then some sort of change. I think they're going to work in some lump sum or per unit in there as well. Second question, I think, is going to be supply and demand with maybe some elasticity, maybe some taxes like we practiced today, maybe even trade. I don't know. And then the third one, I think, is going to be some sort of hiring workers, MRP, MRC, something in Unit 5. How many workers do you hire? Seriously, thank you so much for watching my videos. Teachers, there's a huge changes coming. Make sure you take a look at my website. But you students, guys, good luck on the AP test. You got a week to get ready. Watch those videos. Make sure you're up and running. Try those study guides and the ultimate review packet. I can't thank you enough for watching my videos and for coming to this review session. I'm glad I could help you guys out. If you need anything, you let me know. But I am out of here. And until next time.